Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I would like to start the afternoon session of the UPR. What is it? We will now proceed with the review of Lao People's Democratic Republic. And again, based on Resolution 5.1, the review is based on, first, the national report, secondly, the compilation report prepared by the OHCHR, and thirdly, a summary of stakeholders' information also prepared by the OHCHR. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pongsavat Bupa, Minister, Head of the President's Office, Chairman of the National Steering Committee on Human Rights, to introduce the report. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the Lao delegation is honored and delighted to be present in the UN Human Rights Council today to participate in the second cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. The UPR is an important mechanism of the UN human rights system which involves all UN member states, large or small, in a constructive engagement to assess their human rights practices based on objectivity, equal treatment, and respect for state sovereignty. The Lao PDR takes UPR seriously because it provides the opportunity for us to inform the international community about our national policies, actions, and achievements in the field of human rights, to share our experience and learn from best practices of other countries in the promotion and protection of human rights. For the Lao PDR, the review under the UPR second cycle also takes place at an important time, as the Lao people of all ethnic groups and all walks of life later this year will celebrate the 40th anniversary of the foundation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. This is all but meaningful for us because over the past 40 years, the national safeguarding and socio-economic development have significantly contributed to the enhanced promotion and protection of human rights of the Lao people. The idea of respect of human rights in Laos, which is among the oldest nation in the region and the world, has been part of the cultural development of the nation and its people since the ancient history. Lao ancestors encouraged the people to embrace the values of love, kindness, solidarity, and mutual respect. Even some foreign leaders used to call Lao people as a peace-loving people. Nevertheless, the Lao people went through the difficult past against foreign aggression and occupation in different historical periods. Many countries didn't know the truth about what occurred in Laos many years ago. So why there was the news about the forgotten war in Laos? After the founding of the Lao PDR 40 years ago, the implementation of the two strategic tasks of the national safeguarding and development have always been and had the ultimate goal of creating conditions for the Lao multi-ethnic people to live in peace, freedom, and prosperity, that they fully enjoy their human rights. The human rights, peace, and development are interrelated. Without the environment of peace, human rights cannot be materialized. These days, conflict, terrorist acts increasingly pose the threat to peace, development, and human rights. The Lao PDR joins nations around the world in disapproving conflict and in condemning terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, such as the recent terrorist attack in Paris. Mr. President, following the first cycle of the UPR in 2010, the Lao PDR received a total of 107 recommendations, of which 71 recommendations were fully accepted and 15 recommendations were partially accepted, while the remaining recommendations did not enjoy the support of the Lao PDR because they were not in line with the Lao PDR's constitution and law, or the Lao PDR was not prepared to implement them due to certain factors, including the lack of human and financial resources. The Lao government, however, attaches importance to all UPR recommendations. The national report, the outcome report, and recommendation from the UPR first cycle have been translated into the Lao language and distributed among government officials, stakeholders, and the general public. From the very beginning, the government assigned line ministries and state organizations concerned to implement the UPR recommendation related to their respective role and functions. Many UPR recommendations are integrated into the 7th five-year National Socio-Economic Development Plan from the period of 2011 to 2015 and being implemented through law, policies, strategies, and action programs. To enhance high-level coordination in the implementation of international human rights obligations and commitment, including UPR and human rights reporting, the Lao government established the National Steering Committee on Human Rights in 2012, which now plays an important role in the promotion and protection of human rights in the Lao PDR. The preparation of the national report for the second cycle was led by the steering committee with the participation of all relevant government agencies. Stakeholder consultations were held with mass civil society organizations, international non-governmental organizations, and international development partners based in the Lao PDR. In the preparation process, the Lao government received technical cooperation and support from some development partners, including the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. The national report gives full account on the achievement of the first cycle UPR recommendation support by the Lao PDR. I would like to express appreciation to those countries that made useful and meaningful recommendations which help enhance human rights in the Lao PDR since the UPR first cycle. Due to the limited time, I would like to highlight only some of the achievements, while in the course of the session, members of the Laos delegation will provide more information specifically related to the function and the responsibilities of the ministries or organizations. The Lao government has a consistent policy on human rights, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of the Lao multi-ethnic people are enshrined in the national constitution, law, and other legal documents which are in conformity with the obligation and commitment of the Lao PDR at the international and regional levels. The Lao PDR has continued to improve its governance and public administration to be more effective, transparent, accountable, and participatory to provide better service to the people. The Lao government is currently implementing the legal sector master plan on the development of the rule of law by the 2020, taking into account the UN Declaration on the national and international rule of law adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2012. In strengthening the national rule of law, the National Assembly has adopted or amended more than 100 laws in the political, judicial, national defense, public security, economic, social, cultural, and environmental domains. One of the most important developments currently in the political life and the national legal framework of the Lao PDR is the ongoing work on amending the Constitution to meet the present and future needs of the state administration and the national socio-economic development. The amendment process for the Constitution is transparent and participatory. Consultation to gather opinion from the government official experts have been organized throughout the country. Input from the consultation are being studied and considered by the National Drafting Committee. The final draft amended Constitution will be made available for comment and input from the public. The government attaches importance to the prevention and combating corruption through the implementation of the law on anti-corruption, other related law and legal instruments, especially the decree on asset declaration for government officials at all levels and the UN Convention Against Corruption ratified by the Lao PDR are being effectively implemented nationwide. Mr. President, the Lao PDR is in the process of implementing the 75-year National Socio-Economic Development Plan, with significant achievement being made. As such, most of the MDG have been achieved or are on track to be achieved by the end of 2015, and most of the UPR recommendations, especially those related to economic, social, and constitutional rights, such as the right to health, education, food, housing, land, as well as the right to development and poverty reduction, have been progressively realized. The country has enjoyed political stability, peace, and social order, sustained an economic growth rate of more than 8% per annum, and the slight fall to 7.5% in 2014 due to the world economic and financial crisis and some other factors. In overall, the well-being of the people has improved steadily. GDP per capita has increased considerably. For poor households have decreased to 8.11%. This is indicative of the solid foundation being laid for the country to achieve the goal of graduating from the NDC status in 2020. In the implementation of the UPR recommendation related to civil and political rights, the Lao PDR has also recorded significant accomplishment. The government has put in place a policy governing the judicial sector in the effort toward the rule of law in order to fully ensure equality before the law and the court, due process of law and fair trial in accordance with Article 14 of the ICCPR. The rights related to fair trial and the independence of the judiciary are ensured in the justice system, especially in the law on criminal procedure, law on civil procedure, law on people's court, law on people's prosecutor, law on lawyer, among others. The right to freedoms of expression, assembly, and association are guaranteed in the Constitution, laws, and decrees. Violation of these fundamental freedoms is a criminal offense punishable by the penal law. Likewise, freedom of religion or belief is also protected in the Constitution and law, especially the Prime Minister's Decree number 92. The government continues to improve prison conditions and attach importance to training for prison officers so they have knowledge and understanding of the law, international norm, and principle on prison management and treatment of offenders in accordance with the human rights treaties to which the Lao PDR is party. The rights and dignity of inmates are protected by law. Those prisoners who have good behavior are entitled to receive pardon or reduced sentences. In 2014 alone, more than 900 prisoners have been granted pardons or reduced sentences by the President of the Lao PDR on the occasion of the 39th anniversary of the foundation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. The Lao government attaches importance to the rights and legitimate interests of specific groups in the country. The Lao PDR is a multi-ethnic nation consisting of 49 ethnic groups living in harmony. The Constitution and law and policy of the government encourages solidarity, non-discrimination, and equal treatment of all ethnic groups. Any act of division of solidarity among ethnic groups are prohibited and punishable under the penal law. The rights of women, children, and persons with disabilities are protected and promoted through the implementation of the relevant constitutional provision and specific law, decrees, national strategies, and action programs. These included law on the development and protection of women, law on the protection of rights and interests of children, law on juvenile criminal proceedings, the Prime Minister's decree on the rights of persons with disabilities, and the recently adopted law on violence against women and children. Mr. President, on the implementation of the UPR recommendation related to the international cooperation on human rights, the Lao PDR is now party to 7 core human rights conventions, namely ICERT, CEDAW, CRC, ICCPR, ICESCR, CRPD, and CAT. Furthermore, the Lao PDR is party to the optional protocol to CRC concerning sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography, and the involvement of children in armed conflicts. Being a state party to human rights convention and protocols, the Lao PDR has adopted necessary measures on the implementation of treaty obligation in good faith in the national law making and law application and enforcement process. Treaty obligations are taken into consideration, and in case of conflict between treaty obligation and national legislation, the treaty obligation will prevail. This legal approach is clearly set for the Presidential Ordinance on Treaty Making, Accession and Implementation of 2009 and is reiterated in the law on lawmaking adopted by the National Assembly in 2012. On fulfilling treaty reporting obligations, since the UPR first review, the Lao PDR has submitted the 16-18 combined periodic reports under ICERT in 2011, 2 sub-reports concerning violence against women and women migrant workers under CEDAW, initial report under CRC's 2 abstinence protocol. As for the overdue report under ICCPR, ICESCR, and CRPD, we have been working hard in the preparation to fulfill the reporting obligation under the respective convention in the near future. The Lao government attaches importance to raising awareness and dissemination of human rights treaties, the UPR recommendation, and to developing capacity of government officials and stakeholders in the national implementation. Seminar, workshops, and training courses on human rights were organized for different target audiences, including government officials at the central, provincial, and district levels, members of the National Assembly, judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, mass and civil society organizations, academic and research institutions, as well as students of law school across the country. Every year, the country observes the International Human Rights Day on 10 December with the participation of government officials, students, and stakeholders, which helps further raise awareness of human rights in the Lao society. In the capacity building and awareness raising initiatives, the Lao PDR received financial and technical support from development partners under the bilateral and multilateral frameworks. The Lao government has extended its goodwill cooperation in providing information and clarification to the Human Rights Council special procedure and other mechanisms to some countries and organizations in respect of their queries, questions, or issues of interest concerning human rights practice in the Lao PDR. In the follow-up on the UPR recommendation related to inviting special rapporteur to visit the country, the Lao government has been preparing for such visit by organizing seminars to raise awareness and understanding of the role and function of the special procedure among government officials and stakeholders. At the regional level, the Lao PDR has contributed to the development of human rights in ASEAN in terms of institutional building and standard setting. The Lao PDR actively participated in the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, and has contributed to the drafting of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, the ASEAN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the ASEAN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Children. The Lao PDR is also leading the HR thematic studies on the right to peace, the right to education, and the right to health in ASEAN. In December 2014, the Lao PDR successfully hosted the regional workshop on comparative human rights law in ASEAN, focusing on domestically of human rights obligation. At the bilateral level, the 5th Human Rights Dialogue with the EU was successfully held in May 2014 in Brussels, while the 4th Human Rights Dialogue with Australia will be held in early March 2015 in Canberra. Apart from the institutionalized bilateral human rights dialogue, the Lao PDR has exchanged views and experience on human rights with some other countries to share good practices on human rights implementation. Mr. President, while the Lao PDR has recorded significant achievement in advancing human rights in the Lao PDR since the first review of the UPR, the country nevertheless has faced a number of constraints and challenges, including UXO and the development infrastructure, being LLDC, natural disasters, disease outbreaks, limited human resources, budget constraints, which have hindered the full implementation and realization of human rights in the Lao PDR. As future action to overcome the challenges and constraints and to further advance human rights in the Lao PDR, the Lao government has set priorities which include focus on national socio-economic development and poverty reduction, further development of the rule of law, improvement of the governance, continuing the effort to achieve MDG, and graduating the country from the LDC status in 2020, continuing the effort on UXO's clearance, improvement of public health service, education, and the development and protection of women, children, and other vulnerable groups. In the implementation of the aforementioned priorities, the Lao PDR will continue to participate in the international and regional legal framework on the promotion and protection of human rights by considering the ratification of more human rights conventions, including the International Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and members of their families, among others. The Lao PDR will continue dissemination of information on human rights, translating human rights obligation and commitment into national policies, laws, strategies, programs, and projects. The Lao PDR will consider inviting Human Rights Special Rapporteur to visit the Lao PDR on a case-by-case basis. An invitation will be soon sent to the Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing to visit the country in the course of 2015. Mr. President, the Lao PDR is running for membership in the UN Human Rights Council for 2016-2018, and we would like to seek support from the international community to give us a chance to serve for the first time on this important and prestigious council. If elected to the council, the Lao PDR will do its utmost to contribute to the effectiveness and efficacy of the Human Rights Council, which is the most important body in the UN systems on the promotion and protection of human rights, and at the same time, the Lao government will continue to concert all efforts for the betterment of human rights of the Lao people. I trust that this UPR session for the Lao PDR will be successful and productive. The Lao delegation looks forward to comment and input from all delegates in the interactive dialogue. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your statement and for your presence with us this afternoon. Before giving the floor to delegations for their questions and comments, I would like to remind you that the speaking time will be 1 minute and 40 seconds for all. I would like to invite speakers to respect the established time limit in order to accommodate all inscribed speakers. Having said this, I would like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Norway.
Norway welcomes the delegation of the Lao PDR and recognizes efforts made towards attaining the standards of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. In 2010, Lao PDR accepted Norway's recommendations on maternal and child mortality and access to education. Although progress has been made, challenges remain. Increased prioritization of the attainment of the right to health and the right to education is key on the way to reaching the goal of becoming a middle-income country. It is also key in counteracting the increasing socio-economic differences. We welcome Lao PDR's efforts so far and encourage continued focus also on achieving off-track MDGs. Norway remains concerned about the situation of freedom of expression in Lao PDR, including the recent adoption of an internet decree that significantly restricts freedom of expression online. Norway would like to take this opportunity to provide 3 recommendations to Lao PDR. First, we recommend that Lao PDR enable independent, local and international NGOs, including international human rights organizations, to freely register and to operate in accordance with international law and standards. Second, we recommend that Lao PDR, before the end of 2016, extend a standing invitation to the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right to freedom of opinion and expression, as well as to the Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances. Finally, Norway recommends that Lao PDR impose an immediate de jure moratorium on executions with a view to the complete abolition of the death penalty for all crimes. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Paraguay, Vice President, Your Excellency.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. Paraguay extends a very warm welcome to the distinguished delegation of the Lao PDR. We welcome the country's accession to international human rights instruments, inter alia, the ratification of the Convention Against Torture and Other Forms of Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment, and the signature of the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances. We recognize the efforts of the Lao PDR to combat poverty, as well as the different legislative changes that emerged from the first UPR, such as the Law on People's Courts, the Law on Public Prosecutor, and the Juvenile Penal Code, inter alia. We also note the review of legislation to ensure protection of the rights of women and children. We particularly welcome the establishment of the National Steering Committee on Human Rights and other interinstitutional mechanisms for the promotion and protection of human rights, and we are sure that as well as contributing to treaty body reporting obligation fulfillment, this will also enable the effective enjoyment of human rights. Paraguay's recommendations are as follows. Firstly, to ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Forms of Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Punishment or Treatment, and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances. Secondly, to examine the possibility of setting up a system of monitoring for international recommendations with a systematic approach and follow-up to recommendations of the treaty bodies and Human Rights Council mechanisms. And thirdly, to extend an open and standing invitation to the special procedures of the HRC. I thank you, President.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from the Philippines.
President, the Philippines warmly welcomes a delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic headed by His Excellency Pong Savat Bopa, and the presentation of its second national report. My delegation commends Lao PDR's demonstrated commitment to the enhancement of human rights in the UPR process. Despite limited financial and human resources, the Lao PDR's government endeavored to translate its national report and the outcome report of the first UPR cycle into Lao language, published and disseminated these reports not only to government officials, but also to other stakeholders and to the general public. In addition, the accepted recommendations were reflected and implemented through its national socio-economic development plans and other domestic policies and programs. My delegation appreciates Lao PDR's being a state party to at least 7 core international human rights conventions, including CEDAW, ICCPR, CRC, and ICESR. As a fellow ASEAN member state, the Philippines is a witness to Lao's active engagement in regional human rights mechanisms, such as the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights and the ASEAN Committee on Women, and in the development of regional human rights instruments, such as the ASEAN Anti-Human Trafficking Convention. We recommend that Lao PDR considers accelerating its efforts towards its ratification of the Migrant Workers' Rights Convention and of other international human rights instruments that it is not yet a party to. Mr. President, my delegation also recognizes the measures being implemented by the Lao PDR's government to combat corruption and its determined efforts to promote transparency and accountability in public affairs. We recommend that Lao PDR continue its efforts in implementing its master plan and the development of the rule of law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The floor goes to a distinguished representative from Poland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Poland would like to thank the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic for its informative national report and its active participation in the second UPR cycle. Poland observes with appreciation the progress made by the Lao People's Democratic Republic in the enactment or amendment of several important laws, including the law on the People's Court, the law on the public prosecutor, the penal law and the law on criminal procedure and juvenile criminal procedure, as well as setting up of several interagency mechanisms established to promote and protect human rights. However, we believe that further work is needed in order to fully implement UN human rights standards. Therefore, Poland recommends to the Lao People's Democratic Republic 1. To access to the ICCPR OP2 aimed at abolition of the death penalty, 2. To carry out a prompt, independent and impartial investigation aimed at determining the fate or whereabouts of Sombath Somphone. 3. To enforce the moratorium on new land concessions announced by Lao government in June 2012 and to reform the current system for the management of land leases and concessions. Finally, we wish to recommend that the Lao People's Democratic Republic remove all restrictions in law and practice which infringe upon the work of civil society and to ensure that all legal provisions on the rights to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly are in line with international human rights standards. I thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished representative from Portugal, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Portugal welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks it for the presentation of their national UPR report. Portugal welcomes the fact that the Lao PDR has become a party to the Convention Against Torture. Moreover, Portugal welcomes the progresses achieved in the promotion of the rights of women and, in this context, would like to recommend that the Lao PDR adopts a National Action Plan on Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. Furthermore, Portugal would like to offer the following recommendations to the government of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. To undertake a thorough investigation consistent with international practices and standards into the disappearance of Mr. Sombath Somphone. To consider establishing a national human rights institution compliant with the Paris Principles and provided with the necessary resources to adequately carry out its mandate. And, finally, to ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR, the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, and the optional protocol to the ICESCR. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I would like to call upon the distinguished representative from Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, my delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. The Republic of Korea commends the efforts made by Lao PDR in the field of human rights, particularly including the formulation of the master plan on the development of the rule of law and the enactment or amendment of several important laws. We hope that the master plan can be translated into concrete action to improve the human rights situation at all areas. We also take note that Lao PDR has ratified the Convention Against Torture and is considering ratification of other major international human rights instruments. Hoping that the government of Lao PDR will continue to build upon the current achievements, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. First, we recommend that Lao PDR fully incorporate major human rights treaties that Lao PDR has ratified into its domestic laws and to allocate adequate human and financial resources to implement the laws. Second, we recommend that Lao PDR continue to exert efforts to accede to international human rights instruments to which it is not yet a party. Third, we recommend that Lao PDR put forward more efforts to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women, and to ensure greater women's empowerment, representation, and advancements in all sectors. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished representative from the Russian Federation, please.
President, we welcome the delegation of Lao PDR led by Mr. Pongsavat Bupa, and we thank them for their report. We commend the efforts of the government of the Lao PDR to implement several core international human rights conventions, including those on the protection of labour. We recommend that this work be continued. We are pleased to note measures taken by Lao PDR to protect the rights of women and children in the framework of the current laws on the advancement and protection of women and protection of the rights and interests of children. In particular, we would like to note the positive effect of the government's efforts on the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, in particular given the adoption of the relevant national laws. We recommend that this work to protect the rights of persons with disabilities be continued. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished representative from Serbia.
Mr. President, Serbia welcomes the progress of the Lao People's Democratic Republic with respect to the protection of human rights since the last UPR review. We commend the Lao government on their commitment to the right to health of its citizens, which is demonstrated in the increase of access to health services and the achievement of the nation MDG targets for under 5 mortality rate. We also applaud the growing number of women's participation in government and local administration. We welcome that the Lao PDR has adopted several laws and governmental national action plan to prevent and combat human trafficking, and we encourage them to proceed to the adoption on the law on fighting trafficking. With regard to further developments in the promotion and protection of human rights, we would offer 2 following recommendations to Lao PDR. 1, step up efforts to prevent and combat modern forms of slavery and human trafficking, with special attention to the investigation and prosecution of all cases of sale and trafficking of children, including providing protection of child victims. 2, define torture in its criminal procedure code in accordance with the CAT standards. We wish Lao PDR successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished representative from Sierra Leone, Your Excellency.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone welcomes the delegation of the Lao PDR and thanks them for their national report. My delegation commends the government of the Lao PDR for the ongoing efforts to promote human rights in the country, particularly for its master plan on the development of the rule of law, which includes a 5-year legislative plan. Sierra Leone also congratulates Lao PDR for its progress in promoting economic and social rights, particularly in achieving most of the MDGs. Sierra Leone is concerned about reported discrimination against minorities and religious groups, as well as land-grabbing practices by companies for industrial exploitation, and urges the government to take steps to address these. My delegation would also like to encourage Lao PDR to seek funds to set up a human rights institution in conformity with the Paris Principles. Recommendations: 1. Ratify the ICRMW and the optional protocols of CAT, ICESCR, and CEDAW. 2. Submit outstanding and long overdue reports to the relevant treaty bodies. 3. Establish measures and programs to eradicate human trafficking and gender-based violence, especially of women and girls. 4. Ensure the implementation of national laws created to abolish early marriage and impose sanctions penalizing this practice. In conclusion, Sierra Leone notes the intention of Lao PDR to graduate from the LDC status in 2020 and wishes it well in this regard. Sierra Leone also wishes Lao PDR a successful completion of this cycle of the UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Nepal.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic led by His Excellency Mr. Phongsavat Bupa and congratulates them for the presentation of a comprehensive national report outlining important steps undertaken by the government of the Lao PDR for the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. We note with appreciation the various legislative, procedural, and institutional measures executed by the Lao PDR in implementation of the pledges and recommendations since the adoption of its initial UPR report. The Lao PDR's conscious implementation of the vision of building a state fully governed by the rule of law by 2020 is well linked to its objective of graduation from the LDC status. We encourage the government to build on its success of MDG implementation and carry forward all social and economic development activities, keeping people at the center. While wishing Lao PDR all success in its UPR engagement, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. First, give continuity to strengthening of national human rights institutions and mechanisms. Second, continue ongoing efforts of the government towards increased realization of the human rights of its people, including through poverty elevation measures and investment in health and education. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Slovenia, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks them for their presentation today. We take note of a number of normative steps taken to improve the protection of human rights. We commend the government's efforts for the promotion of gender equality, development and poverty eradication. We welcome the ratification of the Convention Against Torture and the adoption and implementation of the National Action Plan on Anti-Human Trafficking. However, we remain concerned about reported discrimination experienced by certain ethnic groups. We also join CRC's concern that the Lao PDR remains the country of origin, transit and destination for victims of trafficking for the purposes of forced labor and sexual exploitation. In light of these challenges, we would like to recommend to the government of Lao PDR, first, to fully respect the right to freedom of religion, promotion of tolerance and interreligious dialogue. Second, to fully implement national legislation on trafficking and address root causes of trafficking. And third, to consider acceding to or ratifying the second optional protocol to the ICCPR aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. Thank you.
Next speaker is the distinguished representative from Spain.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, President. Spain extends a cordial welcome to the delegation of the Lao PDR and thanks it for participating in this exercise. It's also grateful to the distinguished chair of the National Human Rights Committee and head of delegation for the presentation. Spain recognises the efforts of the authorities of the Lao PDR in the human rights sphere and acknowledges its role within ASEAN as part of the preparation of conventions and instruments, including the Convention Against Trafficking Human Beings. To date, the Lao PDR has signed and ratified the majority of international conventions on human rights. As such, Spain reiterates its recommendation that it ratify the International Convention to protect all persons against enforced disappearances. In addition, Spain recommends that Laos ratify the optional protocol to the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. Spain has paid close attention to the Lao PDR's efforts to bring its criminal legislation into line with Article 6 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. However, more can be done. To that end, Spain recommends that as a precondition to the abolition of the death penalty, the Lao PDR restrict the use of the death penalty in its penal code to the most serious offences. Spain also recommends that an official moratorium be applied both on the application and execution of the death penalty. Spain wishes to recall the importance of a strong civil society on the road towards building a solid system of human rights, and as such expresses its concern at the recent modification of the law governing NGOs, which restricts their activity. Spain lastly therefore recommends that the Lao PDR reverse the approval of this law and that it put in place mechanisms as necessary to accelerate the process of legalizing NGOs. I thank you, President.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Sri Lanka.
The delegation of Sri Lanka extends a warm welcome to the high-level delegation from Lao People's Democratic Republic. We thank Lao PDR for its national report and update made this afternoon. At the outset, Sri Lanka wishes to recognize Lao PDR's achievements in the promotion and protection of human rights. In this regard, we commend Lao PDR for becoming a party to the Convention Against Torture. Sri Lanka welcomes the adoption of the Decree on People with Disabilities in 2014, which is the first legal instrument dealing with the promotion and protection of the rights and interests of people with disabilities. Sri Lanka commends the Lao PDR for making poverty reduction as a priority in its national socio-economic development program designed to achieve the Millennium Development Goals in 2015, and note a significant drop in the percentage of people living in poverty during the period from 2008 to 2014. We also note the progress achieved by Lao PDR in the educational sector and recognize the reforms on vocational education and higher education sectors. Sri Lanka recommends Lao PDR continues with the efforts of realizing the MDG targets in the areas of nutrition, gender equality in primary education, reduction of maternal and child mortality. Second, takes concrete steps to tackle human trafficking, in particular by strengthening the work of the National Steering Committee on Anti-Human Trafficking. Finally, we wish Lao PDR success in its UPR engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Sweden.
Mr. President, welcome to the Lao delegation. There are at least 9 reported cases of forced disappearances in Lao PDR. The disappearance of civil society activist Mrs. Sombath Somphone is one of the most internationally renowned cases. Mrs. Sombath was last seen at a police checkpoint on 15th December 2012, and his whereabouts are still unknown. The government issued a statement that the disappearance of Mrs. Sombath would be thoroughly investigated. No results of the investigations have been publicly disclosed. Sweden recommends that Lao PDR intensify the investigation into the disappearance of Mrs. Sombath and accepts external assistance in the investigation and make the results publicly known, and that Lao PDR investigates in a transparent and credible manner all cases of enforced disappearances. The media law and the law on publications heavily restrict the domestic media. Last year, an internet law prohibiting online criticism of government policies and the one-party state was enacted. Sweden recommends Lao PDR to revise the penal code to make all new laws conform with international human rights standards, and that Lao PDR repeal provisions of the law on media and the new decree on internet that criminalize basic human rights and subordinate individual rights to the interests of the state. Further, Sweden recommends Lao PDR to review existing land concessions and cancel or sanction those found to be violating the law. Finally, Sweden recommends that Lao PDR abolishes the death penalty and signs and ratifies the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished representative from Switzerland, please.
Monsieur le Président.
President, Switzerland welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its second national report. Whilst welcoming the ratification by the Lao PDR of the Convention Against Torture, Switzerland recommends to the Lao government to ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading punishment or treatment. Switzerland deplores the restrictions to the rights of freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association in the Lao PDR. We underscore the core role played by independent civil society actors in the promotion of these rights and in strengthening the rule of law. In this context, Switzerland remains extremely concerned about the fate of Mr. Sombath Somphone, who is said to have been a subject of an enforced disappearance, which is a grave violation of human rights. Switzerland recommends to the Lao authorities to conduct an impartial, effective and in-depth inquiry into the fate of Mr. Sombath Somphone in conformity with the international obligations of Lao and to present the results of such an inquiry in a transparent manner. We regret that the work of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, an impartial, neutral and independent organization working in full respect of confidentiality, be impeded in the Lao PDR. So Switzerland recommends to the Lao government to guarantee to the ICRC access with no restrictions and with no conditions to local and national authorities and to detention centres in Laos. Switzerland recommends to the government of the Lao PDR to respect all national and international obligations on forcibly displaced persons. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from Thailand, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Thai delegation warmly welcomes His Excellency Mr. Phongsavat Bupha, Minister to the Presidential Palace Office and the Lao PDR delegation to the 21st sessions of the UPR Working Group. Thailand commends the Lao PDR for the significant progress made to align domestic legislations and its international human rights obligations, in particular the enactment and amendments of several important laws, including penal law, the law on criminal procedure and juvenile criminal procedure, the law on social security, and the law on labor. We also congratulate the Lao PDR on the notable achievements made in implementing its 7th National Socio-Economic Development Plan, which promotes human rights and addresses rights-related issues such as poverty, land allocations, and gender equality. Thailand recommends Lao PDR to further mainstream the rights of the vulnerable population into the formulations of the 8th National Socio-Economic Development Plan for 2016 to 2020. Enhance economic and social opportunity for women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons should be clearly mentioned in the next national plan in order to ensure full implementations at all levels and in all sectors of society. We also recommend Lao PDR to intensify its efforts to promote inclusive growth, especially in the rural and mountainous areas. We encourage the Lao PDR to increase public investment in primary education and continue to improve access to medical care and health services, particularly for people living in the remote parts of the country. As a neighboring country of the fellow members of the ASEAN community, Thailand stands ready to work closely with the Lao PDR to share our knowledge and expertise in such fields such as agriculture, health, medicine, and education in order to help Laos people fully realizing their rights to development. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Timor-Leste, please.
Mr. President, Timor-Leste warmly welcomes the members of the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic and congratulates them for a comprehensive presentation of its national report on this 21st session of the UPR Working Group. Timor-Leste notes with appreciation the continuing efforts made by the government to improve human rights situation in the country, in particular the law on development of protections of women. Furthermore, we would like to take this opportunity to make 2 recommendations. First, redouble efforts to ensure that children were not employed in situations that could be detrimental to their health, development, or well-being. Second, establish a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles. Finally, we wish the government of Laos all the success in this universal periodic review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from the UK.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Kingdom thanks the Government of Laos for its detailed national report and welcomes its commitment to the UPR process. We recognise progress made since the last review, most notably ratification of the Convention Against Torture and improved international access to Hmong refugees following the 2010 UPR. We remain concerned about restrictions on civil society, land expropriation compensation mechanisms, the right to freedom of religion or belief, and the practical implementation of Laos' existing human rights commitments. Recent actions to control access to the Internet risk undermining Laos' commitment to freedom of expression and the right to participate in public and political life. The UK recommends that Laos establish a thorough, transparent and impartial investigation into Sombath Somphone's disappearance, as recommended by UN Special Rapporteurs. 2, that Laos ensures the right to freedom of expression and its other human rights international commitments are upheld in any move to adopt a cyber law. I thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from the USA.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States warmly welcomes the Lao delegation to the UPR Working Group. We remain deeply concerned about human rights situation in Laos, including severe restrictions on freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, association, and religion, as well as the right to take part in periodic and genuine elections. We are concerned that the amended Prime Minister's decree on civil society organizations will further limit civil society space in Laos, particularly since the disappearance of Sombath Somphone in December 2012. We are concerned that the September Prime Minister's decree criminalizing the spread of false information about the government online will be used to unduly limit the freedom of expression, particularly expression critical of the government. We are concerned by reports that during the past year, Christians have been banished from their villages and arrested because of disagreements with local authorities over the practice of their religion or the proper registration of their places of worship. The government should further train local officials on the rights of all individuals in Laos to freely manifest their religion or belief in worship and practice in accordance with the country's international obligations and commitments. With these concerns in mind, we recommend that Laos, number one, reconsider decrees and guidelines that are overly burdensome on domestic and international civil society organizations through lengthy and opaque registration requirements, taxation, and other means. Number two, promote the development of free and open Internet by amending the Prime Minister's decree, which appears to unduly limit the right to freedom of expression online. And number three, amend the Prime Minister's decree on religious practice, Decree 92, to ease the process for religious groups to register their places of worship and allow new religious groups to obtain official recognition. Thank you, Mr. President.
Very much. The next speaker is the distinguished representative from Uruguay.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thank them for their national report, which includes information on the implementation of recommendations from the first cycle. We welcome the National Socio-Economic Development Plan 2011-2015, which has allowed for sustained economic growth. We are also pleased to note that the same plan for 2016-2020 is couched in terms of poverty reduction, equity and human development. At the same time, we wish to underline the ratification of the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading forms of punishment or treatment. Uruguay recommends the establishment of a moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty for all offences, as well as guaranteeing freedom of expression, the press, assembly and association, as well as the freedom of religion and belief, in line with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Further, to ratify the International Convention on the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances without reservations, to ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and their Families, the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman and degrading punishment or treatment, as well as extending a standing invitation to the special procedures and following up with the recommendations made by them, as well as those emanating from the treaty bodies. I thank you.
Sorry. The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from Uzbekistan, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. We warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of the People's Democratic Republic of Laos and thank for the presentation of the national report. We commend the progress achieved in Laos since the first review. In particular, we welcome the implementation of the general plan to strengthen the rule of law, constitutional and legal reforms being carried out in the framework of this general plan, cooperation of Laos with the human rights bodies of the United Nations, as well as ratification of the Convention Against Torture. Our delegation makes the following recommendations. 1. Continue efforts to improve standards of living, ensure broad access to quality education and health services. 2. Further promote human rights culture in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Venezuela.
Thank you, President. We welcome the distinguished delegation of the Lao PDR. We are very grateful to them for their report. We are pleased to note that in its preparation, broad-ranging national consultation took place. The significant progress made by the Lao PDR in implementing the UPR recommendations testify to its commitment to instilling human rights. The Lao PDR has ratified the Convention Against Torture and signed the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances and has been meeting reporting obligations. We are pleased to note that the Lao PDR has achieved the majority of the MDGs as recognized by the UN in 2010, with the UN applauding it as an exemplary country in terms of fulfillment of the MDGs. With the 7th Socio-Economic Development Plan, encouraging results have been made in poverty reduction, leading to a cut from 27% in 2008 to 20% in 2014. We recommend that the Lao government continue pushing ahead with its sound and successful social policy to the benefit of its people, and particularly the most needy within the population. We commend them on the progress achieved in health indicators. We recommend that the Lao PDR continues to consolidate its positive health policy with a view to extending coverage universally and providing high-quality healthcare for all. Venezuela commends the Lao government and wishes it every success in the UPR exercise. I thank you, President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Vietnam.
Monsieur le Président.
President, the delegation of Vietnam wishes a cordial welcome to the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks the delegation for the quality of its national report and the supplementary information that the delegation has provided today. Vietnam welcomes the ongoing efforts of the Lao PDR to implement those recommendations that it accepted during the first cycle of the UPR, in particular the remarkable progress achieved in domains such as the eradication of poverty, the development of human resources, the improvement of management and governance rules, and so on and so forth, which have all created conditions conducive to a better enjoyment of fundamental rights by the people of the Lao PDR. President, Vietnam would like to make the following recommendations to the Lao PDR. Firstly, to pursue its efforts aiming to eradicate poverty, above all in remote areas. Secondly, to continue to incorporate the provisions of human rights conventions to which the Lao PDR is a party into its national legislation and its development policies. Thirdly, to reinforce international and regional cooperation for the protection and promotion of human rights. To conclude, Vietnam wishes the Lao delegation every success in this second cycle of the UPR. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Yemen, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we should like to welcome His Excellency Mr. Bupa, head of the delegation of Lao PDR, and his accompanying delegation. We should like to express our appreciation for the detailed and valuable report on which contains the government's effort in the field of human rights. And in spite of the difficulties and obstacles faced by Lao PDR, it has been able to take legislative measures to bring their national laws in line with their commitments by virtue of the human rights conventions signed by them. They have been able to sign 7 core human rights conventions, which are the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the CEDAW, the CRC, as well as the 2 international covenants on economic, social and cultural rights and civil and political rights, as well as the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Convention Against Torture. My delegation the delegation of Yemen supports the effort undertaken by the government of Lao PDR and recommends it to continue its effort to adopt a development policy to meet the needs of the people, to reduce poverty in order to protect and promote human rights. And we wish Lao every success and progress. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Algeria, please.
Monsieur le Président.
President, my delegation welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks it for the quality of its presentation. Algeria commends the achievements of the Lao PDR in the implementation of those recommendations in the spheres of governance, public administration and the rule of law since the first cycle. Algeria also welcomes those results achieved in the context of the 7th National Social Economic Development Programme and in achieving the MDGs. My delegation welcomes the ratification by the Lao PDR of the Convention Against Torture in 2012. Algeria would like to make the following recommendations. Firstly, to ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and the Members of their Families. Secondly, to ratify the Convention on the Elimination of all Forms of Discrimination against Women, the Optional Protocol. Thank you, President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Angola.
President, the delegation of the Republic of Angola welcomes the delegation of the Lao PDR and congratulates it on the presentation of its national report. We appreciate the commitment of the authorities of the Lao PDR to accede to the different conventions on human rights, in particular the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading punishment or treatment, and we also welcome the signing of the Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances. We have also taken note with satisfaction of the adoption of the national policy for the prevention of corruption and to combat corruption, placing the emphasis on the dissemination and application of the law adopted in 2005 and modified in 2012. Despite the progress accomplished in many areas, we would recommend the ratification of other human rights conventions and the bolstering of the fight against child labour. We wish the Lao delegation every success in this UPR process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Argentina.
Thank you, President. Firstly, the Republic of Argentina wishes to extend a warm welcome to the delegation of the Lao PDR, thanking it for the submission of its national report. Our delegation wishes to commend the Lao PDR for the approval in 2014 of the Decree on Persons with Disabilities, which is intended to apply the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and to ensure the promotion and protection of the rights and interests of those persons. As such, Argentina encourages the Lao PDR to continue with progress to develop and implement national policies and action plans and to look at the possibility of acceding to the optional protocols to this convention. Argentina takes note of the Lao PDR's intentions with regard to the adoption of various international instruments in the human rights sphere, and as such our country recommends that the authorities of the state seek to ratify the International Convention on the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearance, whilst also establishing the offence of enforced disappearance as an offence with a view to investigating and punishing such acts. Lastly, Argentina recommends the government to further cooperation with the UNHCR in order to ensure the adoption of legal and administrative measures to guarantee the respect for the principle of non-refoulement, as well as ratifying the convention relating to the status of refugees of 1951. I thank you, President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Australia.
Mr. President, Australia welcomes Lao PDR's engagement in the UPR process and acknowledges ongoing efforts in human rights adherence. Australia welcomes Lao PDR's commitment to incorporating recently ratified human rights conventions into domestic legislation. Australia recommends Lao PDR establish a formal moratorium on the death penalty with a view to ratifying the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. Australia is concerned by the Lao government's attempt to increase internet censorship. Australia recommends Lao PDR review its decree on internet-based information control and management to ensure citizens' rights to information and expression are respected. Australia remains concerned about the unresolved disappearance of Mr. Sombath Somphone. Australia recommends Lao PDR conduct an urgent and credible police investigation into Mr. Sombath's disappearance and communicate the findings, including to address any suspicions of government involvement in his abduction. Australia is concerned that civil society is not enabled to support socio-economic development and improved human rights. Australia recommends Lao PDR facilitate an environment for local and international civil society organisations to fulfil their role. Australia is concerned by reports of unequal treatment of minority religious communities. Australia continues to urge improvement in village and district level authorities' awareness of their duty to promote individuals' rights to freedom of religion. Australia welcomes Lao PDR's ongoing engagement on human rights and is committed to supporting strengthened adherence through ongoing bilateral cooperation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation welcomes the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic among us. We thank the Honourable Minister for a comprehensive presentation which reaffirms the Laotian government's commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. We have studied the national report with interest and found it informative. Mr. President, as fellow LDC member, Bangladesh is fully cognizant of the challenges and difficulties faced by Lao People's Democratic Republic. We therefore commend the country for the achievements made in its stride in promoting and protecting human rights of its citizens. We are particularly happy to note the Lao government implementing various projects related to poverty eradication. It is commendable that the percentage of people living in poverty has declined from 27% in 2008 to 20.5% in 2014. My delegation also commends the efforts of the country in promoting and protecting the rights of children and that of women by adopting various legal and institutional measures. Finally, my delegation would like to recommend that Lao PDR continues, 1. its national efforts with the support and assistance of the international community in the promotion and protection of human rights, particularly in the realization of economic, social and cultural rights of its people, and 2. continues its efforts in eradication of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Belarus, please.
President, Belarus welcomes the Lao delegation and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its national report. We note with satisfaction the desire of the Lao PDR to hold a constructive dialogue within the context of the UPR and the country's commitment to implementing the recommendations of the first cycle. We welcome the preparation of the national report for the second UPR cycle with broad consultations with civil societies. The efforts of the Lao PDR to eradicate poverty and stimulate development, in particular in rural areas, are particularly noteworthy. Despite the considerable difficulties, today Lao has managed to achieve the majority of the MDGs. We thank them for information on measures implemented on the basis of recommendations concerning combating trafficking in human beings. We welcome the active international cooperation of the Lao PDR in this sphere. We would recommend that in future work to improve the quality of life of the population, particular attention be paid to the special interests of the child, in particular issues relating to health and education, and in combating trafficking in human beings, to strive to eradicate its root causes. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Belgium.
Monsieur le Président, la Belgique...
Thank you, President. Belgium welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and hopes to hold a constructive dialogue with them during this UPR to build on the discussions in the context of the human rights dialogues in the EU that we particularly welcome. In order to have a dialogue on the best possible basis, Belgium recommends to the Lao PDR that a standing invitation be issued to the special procedures of the United Nations. My delegation would express its concern about the fact that the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press and the freedom of assembly and association are suffering in practice from many restrictions. My country is also concerned about the fate of those persons and organizations who criticize the authorities or demonstrate their opposition through peaceful means. So Belgium recommends to the Lao authorities to amend the provisions of the Penal Code, the law on the media, the Internet law and any other legislation which criminalizes the exercise of fundamental rights in order to bring the Lao legislation into line with international standards in this sphere. A dynamic and free civil society is for my country an indispensable ingredient of democracy. So Belgium would like to learn about the state of the inquiry into the disappearance of the human rights defender, Mr. Sombath Somphone. My country recommends to the government to create the necessary framework for civil society, including human rights NGOs, to be able to be included in the follow-up of this UPR without any fear of reprisals. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from Bhutan.
Mr. President, Bhutan would like to express a warm welcome to the distinguished delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic and thank the Honourable Minister for updating us on the human rights development of their country. The reports presented before us suggest that the government of Lao People's Democratic Republic has, since the previous UPR review, enacted and amended important national laws to bring about positive reforms in human rights development. We would like to commend the government of Lao PDR for these initiatives, which clearly demonstrate their seriousness and commitment to human rights development. We are also pleased to note the establishment of several interagency mechanisms established to promote and protect human rights, such as the National Steering Committee on the preparations for the ratification and implementation of the International Conventions on Human Rights and the National Steering Committee on Human Rights. Further, the measures undertaken to enhance and promote gender equality and the advancement of women are significant. We would like to recommend the government of Lao PDR, 1. to strengthen its effort to achieve the MDG targets in the areas of maternal and child mortality and the environment by end of 2015, which we understand is currently lacking behind. 2. To strengthen and seek further assistance from the international community to support its efforts towards development and in effectively implementing the recommendations arising from its UPRs. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Brazil, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Brazil welcomes the delegation of Lao PDR to the second cycle of the UPR. Brazil welcomes measures taken by Lao to eradicate poverty and to promote development, including the implementation of the 7th National Socioeconomic Development Plan. We also praise progress made in the combat against child malnutrition and encourage Lao to continue to work in this area. The country's efforts for AXO survey and clearance, as well as the support provided to victims, are also noteworthy. We note with satisfaction the ratification of CAT in 2012. We stress, however, the importance of amending the national law to include a definition of torture which is in line with CAT and to criminalize all acts of enforced disappearance. The establishment of an ombudsman office or other independent monitoring body would also be an important step. We encourage Lao to introduce a comprehensive definition of racial discrimination in compliance with ICERD in their legislation. We note that the Family Code has been amended to address discrimination in matters of marriage and inheritance. We stress the importance of reviewing legislation that restricts the interaction, including marriage, of Laotians with foreign citizens. We recommend that Lao continue to modernize its birth registration system and improve access to remote locations and step up efforts to ensure free and universal birth registration, and ratify the ICPPED and adopt implementing legislation as well as mechanisms to independent investigation and identify perpetrators of those crimes. I thank you.
The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from Brunei, Darussalam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to warmly welcome His Excellency Mr. Phongsavat Bapa, Minister, Head of the President's Office and Chairman of National Steering Committee on Human Rights of the Lao PDR, and thank him for the comprehensive briefing. Brunei Darussalam commends Lao PDR's inclusive process in the preparation of the national report through the various consultations and organized workshops. We welcome Lao PDR's reform in the national education sector, which are aimed, among others, at enhancing the human resource development and improving the level of education service. We also welcome the emphasis the government has placed on creating opportunities for better access to education for Lao citizens in the both urban and rural remote areas. We therefore recommend Lao PDR to continue its initiative in the promotion and protection of people's right to education. Brunei Darussalam is also pleased with the expansion of Lao PDR public health network, which has widened access to basic health care and with better quality. Furthermore, we are encouraged by the implementation of the health insurance for its people, as well as free health treatment for children under 5 in the various districts and healthcare centers. In this regard, Brunei Darussalam recommends Lao PDR to continue implementing policy to improve the general health of its population. Finally, Brunei Darussalam welcomes the intention of Lao PDR in the running for the seat in the Human Rights Council for 2016-2018 and will like to render our support in this regard. Thank you again, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Cambodia.
Mr. President, Cambodia warmly welcomes the delegation of the Lao PDR and thank the delegation for the presentation of its comprehensive national report. Cambodia appreciates the continued effort and comment made by the government of the Lao PDR in the protection and promotion of human rights after the review of the first UPR cycle. We commend the Lao PDR for enhancing and promoting gender equality and protecting the rights of women and children through the implementation of various international conventions on women and children, as well as national strategies and programs. We also commend the Lao PDR for disseminating and developing capacity building on human rights in the country by organizing seminar, workshop, and training courses on human rights for different target audiences, including government officials, members of the National Assembly, judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, as well as students. My delegation wishes to make 2 recommendations for the Lao PDR. Number 1, increase effort to promote and protect the cultural rights of Lao people to preserve the national culture and the culture and languages of ethnic groups in the Lao PDR. Number 2, enhance the implementation of the international human rights treaties to which the Lao PDR is party and the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration to benefit the entire Lao population. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Canada, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. During its last review, the Lao People's Democratic Republic agreed to become a party to the Convention Against Torture and has since ratified this treaty. Canada welcomes this positive development. Could the delegation inform us of the steps taken to ensure full compliance with the provisions of the Convention by all levels of authority in the country? Canada recommends that the Lao PDR, 1, ratify the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, 2, undertake a thorough and credible investigation into the disappearance of Sombath Somphone and other cases of purported enforced disappearances, 3, establish a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principles, 4, fully implement its obligations under the ICCPR to respect and ensure the right to freedom of expression, 5, become a party to the optional protocols to the ICCPR and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Finally, Mr. President, Canada remains concerned about the condition and treatment of thousands of Hmong people who have been repatriated from Thailand to the Lao DPR, including with regard to the freedom of religion and belief. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Chile.
Thank you, President. We thank the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic for the presentation of their national report. We take note of the various initiatives intended to implement the recommendations from the first cycle. In this context, the master plan for the building of the rule of law approved in 2009 is essentially following the guiding principles of human rights. We recommend that the Lao PDR do the following. Firstly, to continue making every effort possible nationally and through international cooperation to establish a national human rights institution in line with Paris principles. Secondly, to declare a moratorium on executions in the hope that the death penalty will soon be abolished. Thirdly, to impose a specific prohibition on the diffusion of ideas couched in incitement of racial discrimination, in full implementation of Article 4 of the ICERD, and lastly to establish a legal framework to penalise early marriage and adopt measures to eliminate this phenomenon. I thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from China.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Chinese delegation welcomes the Lao PDR delegation. China appreciates the fact that Lao PDR attaches great importance to UPR. It has widely disseminated recommendations it accepted during its first UPR. It has mobilized the implementation of those recommendations among state organs and stakeholders, and much progress has been achieved. China has noted that Lao PDR has made poverty reduction priority in its national economic social development program to improve the living standards of its people. Much progress has been made in realizing the goals of the Millennium Development Goals. China appreciates the fact that Lao PDR is committed to reforming its educational sector, strengthening human resources development, expanding universal access to education, and improving the quality of education. It has paid special attention to access to education in rural and remote areas. We welcome much progress Lao PDR has made in guaranteeing the right to health, culture, and adequate housing for its people. At the same time, we have also noted that Lao PDR is faced with difficulties in eliminating unexploded ordinances. We draw the attention of the international community to the effect of this issue on the enjoyment of human rights. We call for increased financial technical assistance. We recommend that Laos PDR increase the input in education, increase their enrollment rate of girls, and promote gender equality, advancement of women through legislation, policy, and education. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Costa Rica. Please.
Thank you, President. Costa Rica welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Lao PDR, and we are grateful for the report. We take note of the progress made by Lao PDR between UPRs, and we congratulate them on their clear commitment to protecting and promoting human rights. We take particular note of programs and measures implemented to ensure full enjoyment of economic, social and cultural rights, and the tireless fight against poverty. We also acknowledge the major reforms introduced to ensure that the country is governed fully by the rule of law, and we invite the country to continue along this path in close respect of international human rights instruments. Costa Rica takes note of the robust and independent state mechanisms capable of providing oversight and effective promotion and defence of all human rights in line with international standards, and the strengthening of the rule of law is essential in this regard. As such, we recommend that the Lao PDR establish a robust and independent national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. My country also attaches the utmost importance to full participation in public and political life. Freedom of association and freedom of expression are fundamental in ensuring the establishment of an inclusive political system. As such, we recommend that measures be taken to ensure that all legislation, particularly governing the press and media, including digital media, is fully in line with international human rights obligations. I thank you, President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Cuba.
Thank you, President. We very warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of the Lao PDR, and we commend them on the comprehensive report on the results achieved. The report demonstrates the way in which the government has implemented the recommendations accepted during the first UPR cycle, as well as the challenges and obstacles faced by the country in terms of human rights. Laudable efforts have been made to reduce poverty and ensure graduation from LDC status for the country by 2020. At the same time, we are encouraged to note that a priority has been a proposal to speed up the implementation of national strategies to reform public health and education, as well as continued improvements in public health and education service provision nationwide. Mr. President, having said this, we recommend with utmost respect that Laos do the following. Firstly, to continue applying the master plan to encourage the establishment of the rule of law with a view to improving the legal framework and institutional mechanisms, and secondly, to apply national socio-economic development policies and continue to strive to overcome poverty by 2015 and by 2020 to achieve graduation from LDC status. We wish every success and prosperity to the people and government of the Lao PDR. I thank you, President.
Thank you. I would now like to call upon the distinguished delegate from the Democratic Republic of Korea, People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation welcomes the introduction of a comprehensive report by the delegation of Lao PDR. We appreciate the commitments demonstrated by the Lao government in the preparation of the second cycle of UPR. We highlight the successful efforts of the Lao government to ensure political stability and peace as an essential source of enhancement for promotion and protection of human rights. In particular, we take note of a series of measures taken by the Lao government in many areas of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. My delegation wishes the Lao government all the best in its future efforts to further the promotion and protection of human rights and recommends the following. 1. To continue the efforts to improve and develop healthcare infrastructure in remote areas in order to enable people for better healthcare services. 2. To continue the implementation of ongoing national policies to guarantee for the multi-ethnic people for quality education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The floor goes to the distinguished representative from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Mr. President, my delegation would like to welcome the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thank it for presenting its report to this session of the UPR. The Lao government has made great efforts since its previous UPR to implement the recommendations that were fully and partially accepted. Here, the main activities are focused around the implementation of the Master Plan for the Development of the Rule of Law, which was adopted by the government in 2009. More than 90 laws will be adopted or amended to achieve this national goal. What's more, the Lao PDR has committed to ratifying the majority of the core human rights conventions and is currently reducing its backlog of reports under the human rights treaties. Regarding economic, social and cultural rights, priority is given to poverty reduction through the implementation of the 7th National Socio-Economic Development Plan. The majority of the MDGs will be achieved by the end of 2015. Regarding civil and political rights, in particular, we welcome the adoption of the law on lawyers, the ratification of the Convention Against Torture, improving the status of women through the implementation of policies targeting the empowerment of women, and the promotion of gender equality. However, some constraints and difficulties could hamper the smooth implementation of all of the Lao government's commitments. These include natural disasters, budgetary constraints, and limited human resources. Hence, the Lao PDR's call for the cooperation and assistance of the international community to fulfill its ambitious socio-economic development plan. To conclude, we wish the Lao PDR every success at the UPR. Thank you, President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Djibouti.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to warmly welcome the delegation of the Lao PDR, and we congratulate them on the successful presentation of their national report. We appreciate the participative and broad consultative approach conducted by the National Human Rights Commission in interacting with all of the public bodies and non-governmental organizations to develop this report, which provides a realistic assessment of the human rights situation's development. In this review, Djibouti would like to make the following 2 recommendations. Firstly, continue your efforts to broadly reduce poverty. Secondly, reduce school dropout rates, above all in rural areas. Lastly, we recommend that the international community continue to support Lao PDR so that it can achieve its goals and fully implement human rights. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Egypt welcomes the high-level delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic and wishes the government of Lao a successful and constructive review. We welcome the handful of positive policy and legislative reforms undertaken during the period under review, including elaborating the 5-year legislative plan, anti-corruption measures, and the accession to the United Nations Convention Against Torture. Egypt acknowledges that unexploded ordinances constitutes a major obstacle that negatively impact the government's efforts to achieve development and protect and promote human rights. We urge the international community to robustly assist the government of Laos financially and technically in addressing this issue. In conclusion, we present the following recommendations for the consideration of the government of Laos. 1. To continue its efforts in realizing the right to work through comprehensive policies for productive and decent employment. 2. To consider the possibility of ratifying the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their families. 3. To continue to provide effective protection for the family as the natural and fundamental unit of the society. 4. To consider establishing a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. I thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Estonia.
Thank you, Chair. Estonia warmly welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Estonia notes with satisfaction that the government of the Lao PDR has made progress in women's participation at the political level, including in the National Assembly and in the involvement of women in government and local administration at all levels. There have also been positive developments in the EU-Laos human rights dialogue last year. We encourage intensifying the efforts in protecting women and children against any kind of violence, including by full implementation of the adopted laws and policies. We note with concern that violence against children in the home remains common and that some teachers use physical punishment as a means of discipline. While acknowledging the progress in some aspects compared to the previous UPR cycle, such as the ratification of the Convention Against Torture, Estonia still notes deficiencies in practice of basic political and civil rights, inter alia in freedom of expression and internet freedom. Estonia would like to make the following recommendations. First, to ensure freedom of expression and media freedom, including internet freedom, by bringing its national legislation fully in line with international standards, including by decriminalizing defamation, misinformation and related offences in relevant national laws. Second, to acknowledge and guarantee the indigenous people's rights, including by fully engaging indigenous peoples of the country in decision-making in all the matters that affect them. Thirdly, to accede to and fully align its national legislation with the Rome Statute of the ICC and to accede to the agreement on the privileges and immunities of the International Criminal Court. We would like to wish the delegation of the Lao a successful review meeting. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ethiopia welcomes the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic to the 21st session of the UPR Working Group. We thank the delegation for the comprehensive national report and oral update. We commend Lao PDR for implementing significant number of recommendations from the first UPR cycle. We commend Lao PDR for identifying priority areas in the promotion and the protection of human rights, and further note with appreciation Laos effort to enhance the legal and normative framework on the protection of human rights, inter alia fighting discrimination, protection of human rights of child, women's rights, justice system, and the fight against corruption. We particularly note with appreciation the 7th National Socio-Economic Development Plan of Lao PDR designed to reduce poverty and address root causes of underdevelopment. It is also encouraging to note the overarching strategy to realize breakthrough in human resource development, improving governance, regulations, and poverty reduction to build the country on the principle of self-reliance. My delegation would like to recommend the following. 1, to further work in empowering of women to the level of decision-making. 2, to provide more financial and technical support for the preservation of Lao traditional and cultural heritage. Finally, we wish all the best to the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic to its engagement with the Human Rights Council. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Finland, please.
President, Finland wishes to thank the Lao PDR for the national report and its presentation today. Finland recommends that the Lao PDR ratifies the remaining international human rights conventions and continues without delay to harmonize its national legislation with the Lao PDR's international obligations under the respective human rights conventions, and implement them in policy and practice, and strengthen its legal complaint system to ensure that vulnerable groups have effective access to justice. Finland recommends that the Lao PDR fully implements its international obligations to ensure the protection of human rights defenders and other civil society actors while exercising their human rights, including the freedom of expression, association and assembly, and removes all restrictions in law and practice which infringe upon their work. The government of the Lao PDR should establish without delay a new independent commission to undertake an impartial and thorough investigation into the enforced disappearance of Sombat Sompon. Finland appreciates the measures the Lao PDR has taken in promoting human rights. However, more progress is needed with respect to the human rights of the most vulnerable groups, like women, children and ethnic groups. Civil society and human rights organizations have been put under serious strain after the enforced disappearance of the civil society activist Sombat Sompon. NGOs and human rights defenders play an instrumental role in development of an inclusive society. It is very important that they can work without fear of legal or other sanctions. Kopchaide, thank you.
Thank you. Je donne la parole à
France has the floor. Thank you, President. I would first of all like to welcome the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. France commends the ratification by Lao of the Convention Against Torture and welcomes some improvements to economic and social rights. France nevertheless deplores significant restrictions imposed on civil society, including in the context of its candidacy for a seat on the Human Rights Council. France makes the following recommendations to the Lao PDR. Firstly, ensure the de jure and de facto protection of fundamental freedoms so that Lao can be in line with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which it has ratified. Regarding freedom of expression, lift restrictions on the freedom of the press, ensure the independence and pluralism of the media, as well as a favorable environment for the work of journalists. Regarding freedom of association, facilitate the unhindered work of human rights defenders and NGOs, including by reforming the system for registering these associations. Secondly, ratify the Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances and modify legislation as a result. Conduct independent and in-depth investigations into cases of disappearances with a view to prosecuting those responsible. Thirdly, ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Fourthly, formalize the moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition. Commune death sentences into prison sentences. Lastly, ensure the effective respect for rights and international standards for persons deprived of liberty by allocating the necessary resources to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Germany.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Germany welcomes the delegation of Lao DPR to the UPR and would like to thank the delegation for the information provided in its presentation, in particular in relation to questions that we had submitted in advance. Germany would like to offer the following recommendations. First, conclude the process of ratification of the Convention on Enforced Disappearances shortly and investigate vigorously all cases of enforced disappearances, including the case of civil society activist Sombas Somphone, and inform the public transparently about the results of such investigations as far as feasible without endangering the investigation, and bring perpetrators to justice. 2. Ensure in the elaboration and implementation of the national land policy that economic, social and cultural, as well as civil and political rights of all affected persons are fully respected, including by applying international standards such as the FAO guidelines on land tenure and on responsible investment in agriculture, in particular by providing full, adequate and effective compensation for expropriation and by recognizing and protecting customary land rights. 3. Formally abolish the death penalty in law. 4. Continue efforts to improve and facilitate access to the Internet and refrain from any restrictions on content other than permitted under international human rights law, in particular the ICCPR. And 5. Refrain from undue restrictions such as the prohibition to engage in the promotion and protection of human rights, in the elaboration of legislation and civil society organization, and facilitate the registration of international NGOs. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pongsavat Bupa to respond to questions which have been raised so far. Your Excellency, the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the Lao delegation has attentively listened to the comment, questions and recommendations made by the distinguished delegates that have taken the floor. We have observed for the kind words about our nation and people, the valuable support and encouragement for effort and achievement in the promotion and protection of human rights in the Lao PDR. Before I call on members of my delegation to provide further information and address issues that have been raised in advance questions submitted to some countries, I would like to respond to the issues of the missing case, Sombat Somphone. The missing of Sombat Somphone is shocking news for the Lao government, as is happened after the Lao PDR successfully hosted the 9th ASEM Summit in Vientiane. We have been wondering why he went missing exactly during this time. I would like to confirm that the Lao government has never had any hidden negative attitude toward him who live his private life and perform his work in his personal interest and in the development of the Lao PDR over the past 30 years. The Lao government has always emphasized that innocent people will never be punished, and only those who violate the law will be punished. His missing is concerned by the Lao government like the missing of any Lao citizen. There have been many disappearance cases in the world due to the different reasons, including conflict with criminal groups. In some cases, the investigation could come to result quickly. Some cases needed years to solve, while other cases are still pending, despite the countries today have investigating techniques of high technologies. Like many other Lao people, Sombat Somphone sought and received funds from abroad and used to fund for projects implemented in different provinces of the country as a means of earning his living. He traveled to many parts of the Lao PDR and frequently traveled abroad. He was an ordinary citizen and has not been detrimental to the Lao PDR. The missing case is one of the many types of criminal acts that used to happen in Laos before and in many countries all over the world. The investigation committee has always been open to views or suggestions to help the investigation, and committee is ready to receive suggestions from any interested parties with regard to the ongoing investigation. For example, the committee did look into recommendations recently made by the ICJ. There are some organizations that try to discredit the Lao government and tarnish its increasing international reputation by readily using the missing case as a pretext. Some organizations even made accusations that the Lao government might have been involved in the missing. In this regard, these accusations can be refuted by referring to the mere fact that the incident happened in front of a police CCTV camera and the police authorities, based on their duties under the law, cooperate sincerely with his wife and relatives, allow them to view and record the CCTV footage. Also, those investigation steps and action undertaken so far by the investigation committee, the close supervision of the Ministry of Public Security, the concern openly expressed and the attention paid by the Lao PDR leadership are all indicative and the sincerity and seriousness of the Lao government in solving this case. I would like to give assurance that the concerned authorities of the Lao PDR are still seriously conducting the investigation and will continue to do so in order to find the truth and bring perpetrators to justice in accordance with the law of the Lao PDR. And now I would like to continue by inviting the representative of the Ministry of Justice to take the floor to respond to the comment and question relating to independence of the judiciary, the rule of law, and the death penalty. Please, Mr. Kiet.
Mr. President, I would like to provide information and respond to the questions raised regarding the independence of the judiciary, death penalty, and freedom of religion. On the issue of the independence of the judiciary, the Lao PDR is in the process of implementing the legal sector master plan with a view to developing the rule of law by 2020. One of the important components of the legal master plan is to develop the capacity of the judicial institutions in administration of justice, both procedural justice, such as the equality of persons before the law and the court in access to justice, to ensure fair trial and due process of law, and the substantive justice such a fair outcome of the legal proceedings in accordance with Article 14 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. One of the most important developments in the judicial reform since the first cycle of the UPR is the adoption of the law on lawyers, which recognizes the importance of the legal profession in the Lao PDR. Under this law, all defense lawyers carry out their work effectively and uphold their professional ethics. Defense lawyers have the right to meet with individuals who will be their clients following their arrest, detention, or imprisonment. Defense lawyers have the right to examine, copy, or take note of all documents filed in a court case. Thanks to this law, defense lawyers play an increasing role in the judicial system in access to justice and delivery justice to the people. On the issue of death penalty, the Lao PDR keeps death penalty in its legal system as a measure to deter most serious crimes, particularly drug trafficking. However, in reality, in the Lao PDR has been practicing moratorium on the execution of death penalty for a long time, thanks to its humanitarian policy. Under the penal law, death penalty is not imposed on a person under 18 years old and a pregnant woman. Over the past year, many convicted persons subject to death penalty received reductions of sentences due to their good behaviors on the occasion of National Day of the Lao PDR. At the present time, the Lao government is revising the penal law to create a penal code to meet the new circumstances, among others, to restrict death penalty to the truly most serious crimes in accordance with Article 6 of the ICCPR. On the issue of freedom of religion, the state respects and protects the rights to freedom of religion and all lawful religious activities and prohibits acts of discrimination based on religious or beliefs. The constitutional provisions are detailed in the Decree on the Management and Protection of Religious Activities in the Lao PDR, which regulates and protects all the religious activities, aiming at ensuring that all religions are equal before the law and enjoy equal protection of the law. The decree is being revised currently to ensure its practicality with the current conditions in implementing the country's international obligations, including Article 19 of the ICCPR, the relevant UPR recommendations, the recommendations from the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religions and beliefs. In undertaking amendments to the decree, a series of consultations with the participation of representatives from all religions and faiths. The drafting committee is in the process of integrating inputs from the consultation to finalize draft decree, which will be submitted to the government for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ketisak, Vice Minister of Justice of Laos, for your floor. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Kamsang Kai Song, the Vice President of the Committee of Ethnic Affairs, so to take the floor to respond to comment and question relating to the Lao PDR's policy of ethnic affairs and settlement stabilization, religious freedoms. Please, Mr. Kamsao.
เรียนท่านประธานข้าพเจ้าขอตอบคำถามที่บางประเทศได้ยกขึ้นดังนี้คำถามที่หนึ่งเกี่ยวกับนโยบายต่อชนเผ่าสปป.ลาวประกอบด้วย49ชนเผ่าที่ดำรงชีวิตอยู่ร่วมกันโดยสันติมาตั้งแต่ใดรัฐบาลลาวได้ดำเนินนโยบายสามัคคีเป็นทุกแผ่นและเสมอภาคระหว่างชนเผ่าที่เสมอปลายต้นเสมอปลายบนพื้นฐานประเทศชาติเป็นเอกภาพทุกชนเผ่ามีความเสมอภาคต่อหน้ากฎหมายทั้งมีสิทธิ์ได้รับการปกป้องส่งเสริมของประเพณีและวัฒนธรรมอันดีงามรัฐปฏิบัติทุกมาตรการเพื่อปรับปรุงและยกระดับการพัฒนาเพื่อลดพรความทุกข์ยากของทุกชนเผ่าโดยเฉพาะแม่นชนเผ่าที่มีพลเมืองน้อยกฎหมายห้ามทุกการกระทำที่เป็นการจำแนกชนเผ่าและแบ่งแยกชนเผ่ากีดขวางการเข้าร่วมการบ่ให้การมีส่วนร่วมหรือการเลือกปฏิบัติต่ออิงใส่ชนเผ่าแม่นการกระทำผิดทางอาญาที่ได้กำหนดไว้ในมาตรา66และมาตรา176ของกฎหมายอาญา
Excuse me, sir. We only have English interpretation. Interpreters. We only have English interpretation.
Mr. President, the interpreter is trying to address the issue as you speak. We apologize for the inconvenience.
Mr. President, I would like to repeat my statement. The Lao PDR has 49 ethnic groups and live harmoniously since the ancient time. The government pursues a policy of solidarity and equality among all ethnic groups consistently on basis of national unity. Every ethnic is equal before the law with rights to protection, preservation and promotion of their respective traditions and cultures. Under the Constitution and laws, all acts of discrimination, of ethnic discrimination, are prohibited. The government has implemented all measures necessary for improvement and development, as well as poverty reduction of all ethnics, especially the ethnic groups with small number of population. The penal law prohibits all acts of ethnic discrimination and division. Barriers to participation, exclusion, or selectivity based on ethnicity are all considered as punishable crimes under Article 66 and Article 176 of the penal law. As a result, all ethnic groups in the Lao PDR play an increasingly important role in the political, economic, social, cultural life of the nation. Of the total 132 National Assembly members in the National Assembly 7th Legislature, 99 members are from the Lao Thai ethno-linguistic, 21 members are from the Hmong Khmer ethno-linguistic, 7 members are from the Hmong Yunnan ethno-linguistic, and 5 members from Sino-Tibetan ethno-linguistic groups. The National Assembly Committee on Ethnic Affairs is responsible to ensure that the draft laws and other important issues are being considered by the National Assembly, always taking into account the principles of equality and non-discrimination. In the government agencies, representatives of ethnic groups hold high-ranking positions such as the post of President of National Assembly, Deputy Prime Minister, Ministers, Vice Ministers or equivalents, provincial governors, deputy governors, district chiefs. Also, other sectors in the government also has many representatives from ethnic groups in important positions such as Director Generals, Deputy Directors, diplomats and head of the institutions and hospitals, among others. In implementation of the 7th Socio-Economic Development Plan, the Lao PDR is implementing a policy on combining small scattered villages into big villages. The people who live in remote areas, and as the government struggle to find a budget to sufficiently provide for them the various basic services, the relocation policy aims to solving the problem of illegal migration, as well as provide for some ethnic group people who do not have permanent settlement in some areas of the country. In implementing relocation policy, the government always attaches importance on preservation of culture and livelihood of people of all ethnic groups by having public consultation sessions with them first. At the same time, creating suitable necessary conditions for creating new development villages for them to carry on their livelihoods. In accordance with the aforementioned policy, it is observed that those who have been relocated have better livelihoods, able to better access various services provided by the government and better infrastructures such as public roads, electricity, school, hospitals, habitats, and most importantly, they now have stable jobs and market for trades. The Lao government always ensures all its policy is in compliance with the International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which the Lao PDR is party. The case of Hmongs returning from Thailand. As for the group of Hmong who returned from Thailand in 2009, the Lao government has provided all kinds of necessary assistance to them in Phon Kham village, Bolikam Sai province, and Palak village, Vientiane province. Some of those people returned to their relatives and resettled in their home villages where they used to live. All the Hmong people returned from Thailand are like any other Lao citizen entitled to travel documents such as passports, border passes, which many of them already have received. Over the past years, the Lao government organized and facilitated visits by members of the diplomatic community, international organizations, and foreign delegations to those villages. Thank you.
So next, I like to invite the representative of the National Steering Committee on Rural Development and Poverty Alleviation to respond to the question relating UXO MDG and poverty reduction. Please, Mr. Sintai.
Mr. President, I would like to provide information regarding energy implementation and poverty reduction. The Lao government has been trying to realize the 4 breakthroughs, most particularly breakthrough in poverty reduction with the strategic goal to eradicate mass poverty and achieve NDG by 2015 and graduate from the LDC status in 2020. Following this, progress has been made. The country has maintained political stability, social order and safety, sustained economic growth with 8% per annum and $1,700 income per capita in 2014, thus lifting the people living standard. Since year 2011, the government has provided stable settlement and allocated land for people in 7,400 villages, covering more than 86% of total number of villages, bringing more than 100,000 families out of poverty. Headcount poverty rates declined from 27% in 2008 down to 25% in 2014. It is expected that the family poverty rate will be less than 10% in 2015. The accessibility to and the quality of the education and healthcare services have been improved in urban as well as rural remote areas. Moving from accessibility toward the quality of the services provided. Last year, the average enrollment of children at schooling age increased by 8% from the previous year, and it is expected to achieve the Education for All strategy in 2015. The public health network has been progressively expanded along with the medical personnel capacity building, widening access to basic health care, which actually cover more than 98% of the total village number in the country. Life expectancy reaches 69. In terms of MDGs implementation to date, most of the MDGs targets have been achieved. In 2010, the Lao PDR was named by the UN as one of the exemplary countries from low level of progress to making gradual achievements. While many of the MDG targets have been achieved or are on the track to be achieved, certain targets are still challenging, such as nutrition, gender equality in education, maternal and child mortality, and UXO clearance. Thus, more work remains to be done. For example, in the Lao PDR, the most heavily bombed country in the world, UXO continues to pose a major humanitarian threat and a significant obstacle to the country's development, although for decades of peace, stability since the end of the Indo-China War. Thank you very much.
Now I give the floor to the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to provide information on the importance of the Lao PDR's policy on INGO and CSO in the Lao PDR and anti-human trafficking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to respond to some points raised by Member States as follows. First, on INGO, I would like to reaffirm that recognizing an important role of INGO, the Lao government has widened its cooperation with and provided opportunity to the INGO in order for them to increasingly involve in and contribute to the process of socio-economic development. As a result, there are now 172 INGO operating in Laos. From 2009 to 2014, the value of contribution made by INGO reached $352.4 million. The government highly values cooperation with INGO as it has greatly contributed to the socio-economic development, poverty eradication effort, and improvement of the living standard of the people in the rural area. This has been reflected in the formulation of policy measures and regulation for managing and facilitating the operation of INGO, aimed at ensuring the effective cooperation. For instance, adoption of Prime Minister's Decree number 13 in 2010. The decree stipulated a principle and regulation for operation and management of INGO in Laos. And in order to provide a firm legal reference for further cooperation between the government and NGO, the guideline on the implementation of the Prime Minister Decree number 13 has been drafted through a range of consultation among the stakeholders concerned, including INGOs, international organizations, development partners, and it is now waiting for approval and signature. Second, regarding the CSO, the rights of the Lao citizen to create association has been stipulated in the Article 44, Chapter 4 of the Lao Constitution and in related sector law. Furthermore, as a reference for implementing those laws, the Lao government has also promulgated the Decree on Association number 115 in 2009 and the Decree on Foundation number 149 in 2011, along with the guidelines and handbook issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Since the opening for registration in 2009, there are now 147 associations and 10 foundations have officially registered. In 2014, the association have successfully implementation of about 50 projects contributed to social development worth over $4 million. They have also actively contributed to the implementation of UPR recommendation of first cycle and in the process of preparation of the national report for the second cycle of UPR. In order to further improve the registration proceeding in a more convenient manner, both decrees are now in the process of amendment. The third issue I would like to respond is regarding to the anti-human trafficking. The Lao government has also attached a great importance to the issue by streamlining it into the 6 and 7 National Social Economic Development and establishing in 2004 the National Steering Committee headed by Deputy Prime Minister, followed by establishment of the National Secretariat. And the government also adopted National Action Plan for 2013-15, which focus on 4 priority areas, namely policy and cooperation, prevention and protection, law enforcement and prosecution, and victim assistance. We have also signed the MOU with Thailand in 2005, the agreement with Vietnam in 2010, and agreement with China in 2014. Laos also has participated actively in the ASEAN and Great Mekong Sub-region framework, as well as in the implementation of Australia-Asia program on anti-human trafficking. Now the law on prevention and anti-human trafficking is being drafted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, I like to give the floor to the representative of the Ministry of Information, Culture and Tourism to respond to issues of freedom of the media, expression and the use of the Internet. Please.
Mr. President, I would like to respond to the questions raised by Member States regarding the freedom of information, expression, the media and the use of Internet in the Lao PDR. The Lao government pays attention to implement the relevant provisions of the Constitution, related laws and other legal instruments in consistence with the obligations and commitments of the Lao PDR in accordance with the ICCPR, other international and regional human rights instruments. Under the law of the Lao PDR, violation of individual freedoms of speech, writing, assembly, association and others are criminal offenses under the penal law. As a result of the implementation of the law on media in the country, the Lao mass media in own forms have been developed both in quality and quantity. The public and private sectors participate in all media activities. In the country, there are more than 37 television stations across the country, including community media, which 3 channels are state-owned and 3 channels are privately owned, and more than 3 channels broadcasting in foreign programs. National television broadcasts are available in 3 ethnic groups, Lao, Hmong, Khmer, and 2 foreign languages, in English and French. The government had put in place the policy to facilitate and regulate the access to Internet. Currently, various telecommunication enterprises are competing to expand their respective communication grids, as well as continuously improving and updating their systems, and have enabled the people to easily access to the Internet. In 2014, based on the practical experiences from the use of the Internet within the Lao PDR and other countries, the Lao government issues a decree on the Internet in order to manage and facilitate Internet use as well as social media. This decree forms a legal basis for the enjoyment of the right to access to information and expression of opinion online in a responsible manner. The measures against violators are a general principle of law practiced in every country in the world, which is in line with the international norms on freedom of opinion and expression, and the limitation clause under the Article 19 of the ICCPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I would like now to invite the representative of the Ministry of Public Security to respond to the question relating condition of detention. Please.
Mr. President, I would like to clarify regarding some issues, especially on the condition of prisons. The Lao government attaches importance to provide funding to develop and improve infrastructures in the prisons in order to gradually improve living conditions of inmates. Currently, the Lao government is building 4 prisons worth about 6 billion kip or $75 million. After the completion of the new prisons, they will help reduce the crowd of inmates in the existing prisons. In the prisons, there are separate areas such as male inmates, female inmates, the convicted persons under 18 years old, labor and vocational trainings, education, sports, kitchens, clinics, family visiting area, water supply or underground water or water from natural sources according to realities of each detention centers. During serving the imprisonment, each inmate receives appropriate policies from the government, such as consideration for pardons, provisional release with condition according to related law, meet with the families, playing sports, cultures, receiving information through radio, TV, newspapers, growing plants, vocational training, being treated during sickness. The police officers respect the rights of inmates as well as other Lao citizens without torture. The Lao PDR is party to the Convention Against Torture in the year 2012, and the government has set in place measures to ensure the implementation of its obligation under the Convention. Furthermore, in accordance with the Article 27 of the Penal Law stipulates that all criminal sentencing is not only for the purpose of taking away the liberty of criminals, but also to re-educate the offenders in order for them to reintegrate back into society and to avoid becoming reoffenders. Penalty sentences do not serve the purpose of physical torture, nor do they degrade human dignity. Both the penal law and criminal procedure law forbids all acts of violence or torture or any other acts or measures that are unlawful to the suspects or prisoners while in custody or during trials or serving sentence. Every year the government implements policies to give pardon to inmates who have good behaviors. During the year 2010 to 2014, the President gave pardons and reduced the imprisonment terms of 3,850 inmates, of whom 675 people are female, and 109 foreign inmates, of whom 4 were female. On conditions of rehabilitation and training center, Somsanga Rehabilitation Center was established in 1996 by the government of the Lao PDR with a cost of $1.3 million. The center was also received support and funding to build more buildings, renovate old buildings, and purchase equipment for the purpose of rehabilitation and vocational training from a number of countries and international organizations such as USA, Australia, Germany, Singapore, UNODC, with the value of $300,000. The center provides a suitable basic setting for drug detoxification and rehabilitation, and to implement vocational training activities. Since the establishment of the center, there are 25,984 drug-addicted patients treated at the center, of which 24,425 patients are better and sent back to their families, while 1,559 patients are still receiving treatment at the center. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor back to the President to continue the dialogue.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I will now call upon the distinguished delegate from Ghana to take the floor.
Mr. President, Ghana welcomes the distinguished delegation from the Lao People's Democratic Republic and commends them for their commitment to the UPR mechanism. Ghana notes the various steps taken by Laos to reduce poverty and raise the standard of living in the country. We also welcome the changes Laos has made to improve labor laws, including enactment of social security law. However, Ghana recommends that the labor law is brought into full compliance with international labor standards, including the freedom of association. Ghana further recommends that Laos take necessary steps to 1. To ensure that detained persons are treated humanely and given access to legal counsel, and all allegations of torture in detention are properly investigated. 2. To ensure that all ethnic groups are treated equally and have equal access to social services, including health and education. 3. To implement the national legislation against trafficking in persons to curb the high incidence of trafficking in the country. 4. To issue standing invitations to all special procedures. And 4. To ratify the Rome Statute on the ICC and the International Convention on the Rights of All Migrant Workers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I would like to call upon the distinguished representative from the Holy See now, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Holy See welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic on the occasion of the presentation of the second national report to the UPR. My delegation commends the steps implemented by the Lao PDR government to reduce poverty, to improve health care, especially to reduce the rate of infant mortality, and to provide greater access to education. The ratification of the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, CAT, is also a positive sign of commitment to the defense of human rights. While a number of undesirable factors, including the extensive prevalence of unexploded ordnances, are a hindrance to a more rapid and effective compliance with international human rights instruments, some situations require urgent attention. My delegation wishes to present the following recommendations. 1. To continue implementing the legislation against all forms of trafficking, and to formulate a specific legislation to combat human trafficking, especially of women and children. 2. To continue carrying out the principles contained in the CAT with a specific focus on the elimination of arbitrary detention, especially of minors, and of violence occurring at the hands of law enforcement personnel. 3. To reinforce respect for the rights to freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and free association. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now would like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Honduras.
Señor Presidente,
President, the Permanent Mission of Honduras welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks it for its report. We recognize its constructive commitment and efforts to implement many of the recommendations from the first UPR. We welcome the actions aimed at ensuring gender equality, overcoming discrimination against women as per the 7th Socio-Economic Development Plan, the National Strategy for the Advancement of Women and the Plan for Women's Development. Honduras also welcomes new legislation and action plans to combat trafficking in human beings and to assist victims. We are also pleased to note the master plan on the rule of law and the socio-economic development plan and Lao's efforts to alleviate poverty. And we would like to make the following recommendations with this in mind. Firstly, ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and the Rome Statute of the ICC. Secondly, ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and their Families. Thirdly, establish a national human rights institution in line with the Paris Principles. Fourthly, adopt legislation and policy to ensure comprehensive inclusion of persons with disability to enable them fully to enjoy their rights. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Hungary.
Mr. President, Hungary welcomes the delegation of the Lao PDR and thanks for the report and the update on the human rights situation in the country. We commend the Lao PDR for the ratification of CAT and recognize the efforts it took to amend the provisions of the penal law and the law on criminal procedure. In order to fully implement the obligations of this convention, Hungary recommends that the Lao PDR include a definition of torture in line with CAT and add specific offences relating to torture and other ill treatment into the relevant legislation. While the Lao Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of religion or belief, we are concerned by the reported cases of discrimination against Christians in some communities and certain ethnic groups on the grounds of their religions or beliefs. We take note that the government is in the process of amending the Prime Minister's decree on management and protection of religion. However, we recommend to the Lao PDR the intensification of the dialogue with religious leaders in order to raise all remaining restrictions on religions by law. Finally, we know that the Lao PDR could improve its cooperation with the United Nations special procedures. The requests for country visits by the special rapporteurs on summary executions, adequate housing and the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association are still pending and some communications remained unanswered. Therefore, we recommend to the Lao PDR to issue a standing invitation to all United Nations special procedures. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I would like to call upon the distinguished delegate from India to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. India welcomes the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic. We commend the efforts of Lao PDR aimed at bringing their domestic legislation in conformity with international human rights instruments that it ratified. We appreciate the establishment of National Steering Committee on Human Rights for enhancing interagency coordination in the promotion and protection of human rights. As part of further strengthening national human rights framework, we recommend that the government of Lao PDR make efforts to establish an independent National Human Rights Commission in accordance with the Paris Principles. We appreciate the priorities set out by the National Assembly in creating a conducive framework for national socio-economic development, advancement of human rights and realization of the government's vision to build the Lao PDR to be a state governed fully by the rule of law by 2020. We also welcome the government's emphasis on HR training and capacity building. We commend measures undertaken by the government in combating all forms of human trafficking and addressing discrimination and violence against women, in particular the 2014 Law on Development and Protection of Women. We recommend that the government of Lao PDR pursue efforts to improve women's access to education and health services and strengthen their role in local development planning. While acknowledging the challenges Lao PDR faces due to its landlocked geography, historical burden of unexploded ordinances, and the vast sub-regional disparities, we commend its achievements in meeting most of the MDG goals. Particularly noteworthy is the significant reduction in poverty levels. We recommend that the government continue to reinforce efforts to support inclusive growth and prioritize budgetary allocations in primary education and in the reduction of malnutrition and maternal and infant mortality rates to achieve progress in the remaining MDGs. We wish the delegation of Lao PDR all success in its future endeavors. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Lao PDR led by His Excellency Pong Safat Bopa and thanks them for the report. Indonesia appreciates the commitment and efforts of Lao PDR to advance a state governed by the rule of law and respect for human rights values through the implementation of the Master Plan on the Development of Rule of the Law. We also note with appreciation the implementations of the National Socio-Economic Development Plan and hope that the plan will comprehensively progress the human development for all in Lao PDR. As an ASEAN member countries, Lao PDR has been providing important contribution to the regional efforts to promote human rights, including through leading the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission Human Rights studies on the right to peace, the right to education, and the right to health. We are confident that Lao PDR will continue its valuable engagement to HR and benefit from regional cooperation on relevant human rights issues. Mr. President, in the spirit of dialogue and cooperation, Indonesia wishes to kindly submit the following recommendations. While recognizing the government efforts in tackling the problem of human trafficking, we recommend that Lao PDR speed up the drafting of the law on anti-human trafficking. We also recommend the Lao PDR to consider ratifying the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers and their family members. To conclude, Mr. President, Indonesia would like to offer its best wishes to the government and people of Lao PDR in their future endeavors. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Iran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, my delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks them for comprehensive and informative national report presented to the working group. We appreciate the efforts of the government of Lao PDR made for promotion and protection of human rights despite the challenges the country is facing. My delegation notes with appreciation the measures taken by Lao PDR for the improvement of education for children in both urban and rural remote areas in order to have better access to education of various levels through National Education System Reform Strategy. We also note from the national report that Lao PDR has adopted and is implementing a national action plan on anti-human trafficking and that drafting an anti-human trafficking law is on the process. We would like to make the following recommendations for consideration by the Lao PDR. To continue its educational reform towards comprehensive and inclusive education policies with a particular focus on vulnerable groups including children, to further strengthen its national legislation to combat human trafficking. I thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Ireland, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks it for its presentation today. We welcome the progress the Lao PDR has made since the first UPR cycle in relation to human trafficking, including establishment of a steering committee, elaboration of a national action plan and increased training. Ireland is deeply concerned regarding the position of human rights defenders in the Lao PDR and in particular by reports of enforced disappearances and failure to adequately investigate such alleged crimes. Ireland recommends that the Lao PDR take all necessary steps to protect human rights defenders from intimidation, ill treatment or violence, including enforced disappearances, and to ensure prompt, impartial and thorough investigation of all allegations, including those of enforced disappearances. Further, Ireland is disturbed by reports of acts of discrimination and repression against religious and other minorities, in particular Christians and the Hmong people. Ireland recommends that the Lao PDR ensure the protection of the rights of persons belonging to religious and other minorities and effectively investigate all alleged abuses and violations. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the distinguished delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thank them for their presentation and report. Italy commends the Lao PDR for the progress achieved so far, and in particular for the signature and ratification of the Convention Against Torture following the first UPR cycle, and for the adoption of legislative measures aimed at better applying and implementing human rights treaties provisions. As far as the accession to core human rights instruments is concerned, Italy recommends that the Lao PDR consider ratifying the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances and establish an independent commission to carry out impartial investigations in a prompt, impartial and effective manner into the alleged cases of enforced disappearances reported in the country. Italy further recommends to accede to the Rome Statute of the ICC and to the Agreement on the Privileges and Immunities of the Court. We welcome the de facto moratorium on the death penalty practiced by the Lao PDR, taking note of the intention expressed in the national report of revising the penal law to be in full compliance with Article 6 of the ICCPR. Italy recommends that the Lao PDR consider taking steps to formally establish a de jure moratorium on the use of the death penalty with a view to its legal abolition. Italy also recommends to ratify the second optional protocol to the ICCPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Japan to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic. We commend the proactive steps taken by the Lao PDR in the field of human rights, including engagement in the activities of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights and the ratification of core human rights conventions. Japan encourages the Lao PDR to ensure domestic implementation of them and recommends that it submits national reports to the treaty bodies, including the ICESCR, and issue a standing invitation to special procedures. Japan appreciates the preparation being made towards the ratification of the CPD. In this connection, we expect the Lao government's continued efforts to resolve the case of the missing human rights defender. In addition, given reports of restrictions to the rights of freedoms of expression and the press, as well as freedoms of association and peaceful assembly, Japan encourages the Lao PDR to take further steps to guarantee these rights. Lastly, Japan notes with appreciation that steady implementation of measures focused on women and children and recommends that additional measures be taken for the protection of women and the children. I thank you again, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Kuwait.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, the delegation of my country should like to welcome the head of the Lao PDR delegation, His Excellency Mr. Buffa, and the accompanying delegation. We should also like to commend the effort deployed in the preparation of the report under review because it contained comprehensive information on the advancement reached in the field of human rights. Mr. President, upon considering the report under review, we took note of the efforts deployed by the government of the Lao in order to promote human rights in many fields, particularly in the economic, social and cultural fields. And all that effort is to combat poverty and to realize the MDGs by the year 2015. We encourage the Lao PDR to continue its effort in order to realize the right to work, the right to education and to health care. In conclusion, we should like to submit the following recommendations. Firstly, to continue implementing the commitments by virtue of the international instruments of human rights that have been ratified and acceded to. Secondly, to continue implementing the National Plan for Poverty in order to alleviate the poverty and to improve the standard of living. In conclusion, we should like to wish the Lao PDR every success and prosperity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Latvia warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic to this UPR and thanks it for the national report. We commend the government for its efforts to ensure compliance with the rule of law, the steps taken to combat corruption and the country's efforts to eradicate poverty. We are pleased that the government attaches great importance to the international cooperation in the field of human rights, both through its active participation in the work of ASEAN and within the framework of the HRC and the Third Committee. We encourage the country to build on its commitment to cooperate with treaty bodies and special procedures and recommend that Lao PDR extend a standing invitation to all mandate holders. Latvia appreciates the efforts made by Lao PDR to ensure wide access to media and the Internet. We remain concerned, however, about various undue restrictions imposed on the freedom of expression, both on and offline, through government control of media ownership and content. We recommend that Lao PDR decriminalize defamation and misinformation and remove all undue restrictions on freedom of expression from the Penal Code, the law on publications and the newly adopted Internet law in conformity with the country's international human rights obligations. Mr. President, Latvia considers the ICC an essential institution in the effective implementation of international human rights law. We therefore recommend that Lao PDR accede to and fully align its national legislation with the Rome Statute of the ICC. Finally, Latvia believes that the country may benefit from the important role national human rights institutions play in advising the state on the implementation of UPR recommendations, and we recommend that Lao PDR ensure the creation of a strong, independent national human rights institution which adheres to the Paris principles. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I would like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Lebanon to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The delegation of Lebanon should like to welcome the delegation of the Lao PDR. After considering the report that has been presented, we should like to underscore the willingness of the authorities to implement the recommendations that have been accepted in the first cycle of the UPR, and as a prerequisite of the fifth legislative plan of the National Assembly and the fifth and the seventh economic and social plan, which is a manner of protecting and promoting human rights and the enjoyment of human rights in the Lao. We should also like to welcome the accession of the Lao to CAT and their effort to prevent torture. The delegation of Lebanon should like to submit the following recommendations. Firstly, to adopt a law to combat trafficking in people and sexual exploitation, as well as victim rehabilitation. Secondly, to continue to deal with and address the problem of children drop out from school. In conclusion, we should like to wish the Lao PDR every success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Luxembourg thanks the Lao People's Democratic Republic for the presentation of its national report. My country welcomes the lengthy bilateral partnership we have established with Laos, and we welcome the social and economic progress which has been achieved since the first UPR review. At the same time, a delegation would encourage the Lao authorities to make sure that national policies support equitable development in the whole of the country and pay particular attention to vulnerable groups. Luxembourg wishes to make the following recommendations to the Lao PDR. Firstly, to guarantee the effective exercise of the freedom of expression, assembly and association through reforming its legislation, in particular to make sure that the legitimate work of NGOs and human rights defenders not be undermined. Secondly, to conduct with no delay an independent and credible inquiry into the unexplained disappearance of the human rights defender Mr. Sombath Somphone, who disappeared on the 15th of December 2012 in Vientiane. Thirdly, to commit itself towards the definitive abolition of the death penalty and to ratify the second optional protocol of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Fourthly, to cooperate more systematically with the treaty bodies and to allow for visits by special procedures. And fifthly and finally, to accede to the Rome Statutes of the ICC. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malaysia warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. My delegation appreciates the update on progress made since its first UPR and on the implementation of the accepted recommendations. During Lao PDR first review, my delegation's recommendations, among others, focus on the strengthening of national authorities' capacities in dealing with the issue of gender-based violence and trafficking in women and girls. We are pleased that all our recommendations were accepted by Lao PDR and that various efforts have been made to achieve that end. We commend Lao PDR for its continuous efforts in strengthening the rule of law, governance and public administration in the country through the implementation of the Master Plan on the Development of the Rule of Law adopted in 2009. We further recognize that, as a fellow member of ASEAN, Lao PDR actively participates in the work of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights and other ASEAN mechanisms on human rights issues. In the spirit of constructive engagement, my delegation would like to make the following 2 recommendations for the consideration of Lao PDR. 1. To continue its efforts in socio-economic development and eradication of poverty with a view of achieving its MDGs target. And 2. To continue its efforts in training and capacity building programs for government and law enforcement officials in dealing with the issue of trafficking in persons, particularly women and girls. In concluding, Mr. President, we would like to wish Lao PDR every success in its future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Mexico.
Thank you, President. Mexico would like to welcome the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and thanks them for the submission of their national report. Mexico acknowledges the Lao commitment to the UPR mechanism and commends it on the progress achieved since the first review cycle. Inter alia, we would like to underscore the establishment of institutional mechanisms to follow up on international human rights commitments, as well as the Lao National Human Rights Steering Committee. In view of the progress achieved and the challenges ahead, Mexico would like to make the following recommendations. Firstly, adopt laws to prohibit the levying of school fees and adopt necessary measures to ensure free and universal education regardless of gender, ethnic origin, language, religion, belief, disability or social status. Secondly, ensure full participation by women in follow-up mechanisms under the law on the development and protection of women adopted in 2014 and the implementation of awareness-raising campaigns nationwide, particularly in rural areas for women in those parts of the country. And thirdly, adopt legal and administrative measures for the free issuance of birth certificates for all children born on the national territory and for the establishment of civil registry offices in all districts included in rural areas. I thank you.
Thank you. And before continuing with the speakers list, I would like to give the floor back to His Excellency Mr. Pongsavat Bupa to respond to questions which have been raised.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, thank you very much for your interactive dialogue. And so I now would like to invite the member of the Lao delegation to provide further information and address issues that have been raised by member states. So I will invite now the representative of the Lao National Commission for Mothers and Children to reply to the matter of children's rights. Please, Madam.
Mr. President, I would like to address some of the important areas and concerns raised by the member state relating to the women and children. I would first like to highlight the issues of violence. Combating violence against women and children is a priority for our government. Over the past few years, we have made remarkable progress in strengthening the legal and policy framework to protect women and children from all forms of violence, including domestic violence. In 2014, the government of Lao PDR adopted a new national plan of action to prevent and eliminate violence against women and children 2014-2020, which addressed all forms of violence in all settings. In December 2014, the National Assembly also adopted law on preventing and combating violence against women and children. I would now like to address some of the concerns that have been noted in relation to the women and children access to education and health. The government has placed significant importance to maintain public budget allocation to the health and education sectors. Since 2011 to 2012 fiscal year, the government has allocated 17% of the total budget to improve and development of education. In the area of the maternal and child health, the government has enacted a series of health and nutrition policies and plan of actions, including the 7 National Socio-Economic Development Plan, which includes several explicit targets for the child and maternal health. The government has steadily increasing its spending. One area notable in the procurement of traditional vaccines, which starting in 2012, with estimate of $22,000 and reaches an estimate of $459,000 in 2014. Overall, the government has committed in increasing health spending in the 9% of the general government expenditure. Mr. President, let me also continue to address several important other issues that have been raised in the view of the legal process. Firstly, in response to the concern raised about the birth legislations, the government has developed a national strategy and plan of action on the civil legislation and vital statistics with technical support from the United Nations and Plan of Internationals. In support of this work, a survey is currently being conducted to assess the potential opportunity for digital birth legislations, which would help to reduce barriers to register for the most marginal groups, which improve efficiency and help the government to increase birth legislation and expand coverage. Secondly, with regard to early child marriage, the family law was amended in 2018 and set the legal age of marriage at 18. However, challenging remains implementation of the law. Finally, concerns were raised on the child labor. To address the issue, the government amended the labor law in 2019 to set the minimum age of children working at 14 years to permit employment of the children from 12 years of age in light work. This amendment aims to avoid children earning the work of the illegal and the labor law. Also introduced a new provision prohibited hazard work from own persons under 18. To accompany the law, the National Strategy Plan and of Action to Prevent and Eliminate Child Labor for the period of 2014 and 2020 was adopted by the Prime Minister in 2014. I thank you.
Now I would like to give the floor to the representative of the Lao National Commission for the Advancement of Women to respond to the question relating women's rights. You have the floor, Madam.
Mr. President, I would like to give information on the development in terms of gender equalities and the advancements of women. The Lao PDR has been pursuing the policy to enhance and promote gender equalities and the advancements of women. The government attached great importance to the implementation of the MDGs related to the women empowerment, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, the Beijing Platform for Action and other international and regional instruments relating to the rights of women. The international obligation and commitment related to women and children are implemented through the 7 National Socio-Economic Development Plan, National Strategy and Program, as well as the legal framework, in particular the Law on the Development and Protection of Women, the Women Development Plan, the National Strategy for Advancements of Women. Today, Lao women account for 54% in the agricultural production, 41% in the handicraft industry, 57% in the trade and service sector. In education sector, the level of education of women has improved. The number of illiterate women has decreased. The rate of enrollment of female children in kindergartens rose from 10.9% in 2005 to 33.1% in 2013. In primary school from 81.2% in 2005 to 95.9% in 2013. In secondary school from 46.2% in 2005 and 61% in 2000. The number of female students in higher education institution, college, increased from 16,595 to 44,035 in 2012. Women working in government sector cover 43% in total number of public servants. At the present time, women play an important role in the national public affair. In the National Assembly, the total 132 National Assembly members, about 33 are women, covering 25%. Women hold position of President of the National Assembly, Chair and Vice Chairs of the National Assembly Committee. There are 6 female ministers and equivalent, 20 female Vice Ministers and equivalent, 70 female Director General of the Department, 3 female Ambassadors, 11 female Majors, and 191 female Village Chiefs. The Lao government is committed to further advance the role of women in the political, economic, social, and cultural life of the country. The Lao government also pay attention to eliminate the negative attitude toward women and remove obstacles in the implementation of the policy on the promotion of gender role and women's rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. President, I would like now to give the floor back to you to continue the dialogue.
Absolutely. We'll continue from here. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Mongolia, please.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we wish to express our appreciation to the Government of Laos for submitting the second comprehensive national report, as well as for the detailed presentation of the report made by the Lao delegation. Mongolia welcomes the steps and efforts made by the Government of Laos for the implementation of the recommendations accepted during its first Universal Periodic Review back in 2010. Mr. President, we would like to underline the noteworthy achievements attained by the country in a relatively short period of time on improving its governance and public administration to be more effective, transparent, accountable, participatory, and providing better services to the people. Mongolia appreciates the new legislation passed by the Parliament to promote its legal reform and to safeguard full enjoyment of human rights. We acknowledge that Lao People's Democratic Republic is supportive of constructive engagement with civil society and cooperates in good faith with all the relevant international human rights mechanisms. Mr. President, the delegation of Mongolia warmly welcomes the signing of the Convention against torture and other cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment following the first cycle of the UPR review, and calls upon the government of Lao People's Democratic Republic to consider joining the international human rights instruments, including the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in the near future. My delegation commends the government of Laos to request for technical assistance and cooperation as deemed appropriate from the international community, including relevant UN and specialized agencies in respect of capacity development for human rights.
Thank you. The floor goes to the distinguished delegate from Montenegro.
Mr. President, Montenegro warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Montenegro commends the efforts made by the authorities to strengthen the institutional and legal framework for human rights and inclusiveness of the UPR drafting process. We particularly welcome the establishment of several national interagency mechanisms to promote and protect human rights, hoping that it will result in reducing the number of overdue reports and enhancing the overall coordination and effectiveness in the field of human rights. We noted that the CRC was concerned that early marriage continued to exist within certain ethnic groups, even though the practice was prohibited by law. We would like to ask the government to elaborate on the activities, especially in the field of education, undertaken to eliminate this practice. Montenegro makes following recommendations to the government of the Lao PDR: to accede to and fully align its national legislation with the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, including by incorporating provisions to cooperate promptly and fully with the ICC, and the second, to ratify its second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Morocco now.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to welcome the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic and congratulate them on presenting the national report of their country. Morocco welcomes the importance that Lao grants to the promotion of human rights and the development of the rule of law through numerous measures taken on this front. We commend the Lao PDR for its efforts made to promote social, economic and cultural rights by making poverty reduction a priority for the country's socio-economic development, with a view to bringing the country out of the LDC category in 2020. My delegation welcomes Laos' accession to the Convention Against Torture, constitutional guarantees and legislative measures taken to ban and prevent torture. We also welcome and encourage the efforts made to raise awareness of the provisions of this convention, in particular among persons working in penitentiary establishments. Lastly, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. Firstly, continue efforts for human rights education and training, particularly for state agents and officials. Secondly, strengthen national capacities through cooperation with the UN human rights system, in particular the Special Procedures Mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Myanmar.
Mr. President, my delegation warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of the Laos PDR and thanks them for their comprehensive national report and presentation. We are pleased to note that GDP of the Laos PDR has recorded about 8% per annum in the implementation of the 7th National Socio-Economic Development Plan 2011 to 2015. Mr. President, my delegation would like to make the following recommendation for consideration by the delegation of the Lao PDR. First, continue that effort to reach the remaining MDG targets. Second, sustain effort for children to have better access to education at the various levels. Third, further promote measures for the advancement of women and address traditional stereotypes attitude which limit their self-development. As a fellow members of ASEAN, we wish the Laos PDRs a great success in the current reviews. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next speaker is the distinguished delegate from Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Namibia welcomes the delegation of the Lao People's Democratic Republic to the 21st session of the UPR and takes note of the efforts undertaken to implement the recommendations accepted during the first review cycle and for the contributions made to the development of human rights, particularly in the region of origin. Namibia further commends the Lao PDR on its vision for the Lao PDR to be a state governed by the rule of law by the year 2020 and wishes them success with the implementation of the master plan on the development of the rule of law adopted by the Lao government since 2009. Namibia recommends the following: that the Lao PDR continues efforts to modernize its birth registration system and evaluate if more steps are needed to ensure access to universal birth registration in order to ensure the rights of children to nationality is adequately protected. Secondly, that the Lao PDR endeavours to implement the obligations under Article 14 of the ICCPR, which comprehensively guarantees the right to a fair trial and the rights of the accused. We wish the Lao PDR all the best during their review. I thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to call upon the distinguished delegate from Singapore.
President, Singapore welcomes the distinguished Lao PDR delegation to today's UPR Working Group meeting. Since its last review, Lao PDR has bolstered its domestic policies to strengthen governance and to better promote and protect human rights. Laos has also implemented good programs to reduce poverty, attain the MDGs, and to graduate from the LDC status. We recommend that Laos continues to strengthen the rule of law and improve governance. We also recommend that the Laos PDR continue with its socio-economic reforms to better the lives of its people, in particular by investing in education. Singapore enjoys long-standing cooperation with Laos, particularly in capacity building through bilateral and ASEAN channels. We will continue such collaboration by investing our limited resources, sharing our experiences, and working with Laos to attain its development goals. Mr. President, Singapore remains concerned about the disappearance of Somba Somphone, who is the Laotian husband of a Singaporean citizen. This has been a very trying period for Somba's family. We acknowledge that the Laotian government has taken steps to reassure Somba's family that they are dealing with this issue, but we urge it to do its utmost to resolve this case expeditiously and judiciously. Finally, we join the merry friends of Laos in wishing it every success in its development and reforms. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to the distinguished delegate from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks His Excellency and the delegation for presenting the national report, and we thank the delegation for answering some of our advanced questions. We have noted with appreciation that the Lao PDR has ratified the Convention Against Torture in 2012 and encouraged the country to continue acceding to core human rights conventions and treaties. A point of great concern is the issue of enforced disappearances and the fact that the Lao PDR has not yet ratified the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. As other delegations, the Netherlands is concerned about the unsolved disappearance of activist Somba Somphone. Our government views the Lao PDR's efforts in this case as a test of how the country deals with its international human rights obligations. We note the space mentioned here today by the delegation for civil society actors and international partners to help assist in the investigation and invite the Lao PDR to put this into practice. We would like to make the following recommendations. The Netherlands recommends the government of Lao PDR to implement its commitment made during the 2010 UPR to ratify and implement the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. 2. The Netherlands recommends the government of Lao PDR to issue a standing invitation to UN special rapporteurs to the country. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The next and last speaker is the distinguished delegate from New Zealand.
Mr. President, New Zealand commends the roles that civil society and non-governmental organisations play in supporting the Lao PDR government's social and development objectives. In this regard, New Zealand recommends that the Lao PDR government fully enable civil society and NGO groups to conduct their activities, and recommends that the government conduct a thorough and credible investigation into all and any unresolved cases of disappearances of civil society workers in Lao PDR. Regarding freedom of expression, New Zealand recommends that the Lao PDR government re-examine recent legislation that limits dissemination of certain information via the internet, including through social media. Sound government financial planning is essential to achieving socio-economic goals, and New Zealand recommends that the Lao PDR government implement the National Action Plan to combat corruption, including strengthening of laws and enforcement, and provide greater resources to independent anti-corruption bodies. Finally, New Zealand commends the Lao PDR government's ongoing commitment to improving access to and quality of basic education, especially for women and girls. We recommend that the Lao PDR government continue to work to address issues such as lack of teachers, school facilities, and the marked differences between the quality of educational institutions in urban and rural areas. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. This was the last speaker on our list. I would now like to give the floor back to the State under review, His Excellency Mr. Pongsavat Bhupa, for the final remarks.
Mr. President, my delegation don't have any further replies to the last speaker, recent speaker. We just would like to express our sincere appreciation to all distinguished delegates for their participation and contribution to the UPR review session of the Lao PDR, and for their comments and recommendation as to further advance the promotion and protection of human rights. I particularly appreciate the positive assessment by delegates on our achievement in the promotion and protection of human rights and their understanding of the constraints and challenges the Lao PDR has faced in the process of implementation of the UPR recommendation from the first cycle. Mr. President, I think this UPR session for the Lao PDR has been productive and fruitful. There has been constructive and positive engagement and interactive dialogue with delegates. We remain ready to engage in discussion and exchange with the international community in order to further strengthen the enjoyment of human rights by the Lao people. Through this interactive dialogue, the international community has received a better understanding of the real situation of human rights in Lao PDR and our tireless effort in strengthening human rights implementation. We believe that the UPR mechanism will further facilitate experiences sharing and promote better understanding of human rights practice around the world. The Lao PDR is committed to promote and protect human rights and looks forward to continuing cooperation and engagement in the UPR to further exchange experience, lessons, and learn from best practices on human rights implementation with other countries on the basis of sovereign equality, trust, and mutual respect. Once again, on behalf of the Lao government, I would like to thank all distinguished delegates for your kind contribution and constructive dialogue. I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for your excellent chairmanship and guidance. I would like to thank the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Troika and Coordinator, the UPR Secretariat, and all the people that have contributed to the success of this engagement. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and your whole delegation for the presentation and for the participation in the review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of Brazil, Qatar, and Côte d'Ivoire. In accordance with the new procedure announced by the Secretariat at the organizational meeting on 13th January, the recommendation section will be distributed on Thursday, 22nd January at 6 p.m. for adoption on Friday, 23rd January after 3 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on 6 February. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. for the review of Spain. Please note that given the number of speakers inscribed on the speakers list, speaking time will be 1 minute and 15 seconds. I kindly remind all delegation inscribed who wish to withdraw from the list to inform the Secretariat as soon as possible and at the latest 30 minutes before the start of the review. The session is closed.